This week's sponsor is the new film, The Monkey. Based on Stephen King's iconic short story, The Monkey has been brought to the screen by Osgood Perkins, the writer-director of Longlegs, and horror master James Wan. Stephen King himself has described The Monkey as batshit insane and said you've never seen anything like it. And Bloody Disgusting calls it the most outrageous horror movie of the year. The Monkey opens in theaters everywhere on February 21st.
As a parent or mentor, you have the awesome opportunity to help a young person build a future. So if the future they want is in the military, take the time to learn more at todaysmilitary.com, because their success tomorrow begins with your support today.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
You have to control yourself!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking, well, you know, all debutantes are sluts. We're talking, what are you, an owl? And we're talking sensitive, romantic, and weak. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking, well, my mother always told me if you massage your pussy with Pam cooking spray a month before the baby comes, you don't need vaginal rejuvenation.
Yeah. Is this movie set in LA or what?
I don't know, but everyone, we are discussing Tom Ford's sophomore film, Nocturnal Animals, starring Amy Adams and about 100 other famous people.
Oh, Jesus. Like, they pop up and you think, are they in this movie? No, it's just a cameo.
One scene!
It's all famous people all the time.
Okay, just to be clear, you and I are both honing in on Laura Linney, right?
Oh, I was Jenna Malone, but yes.
Yes. Oh my God, I forgot. But
because
yes,
she's in it for 2 seconds.
I want a movie with Laura Linney's character and Jenna Malone's character off having adventures.
Oh my God. Bitches. Bitches on the road.
Okay, well, actually, I'm just going to jump in and bring in our guest, Joe, because this was his pick. So, everyone, you can read his work at Bloody Disgusting, including his new column, Found Frights, which highlights new, underrated, and underseen found footage movies. You may also remember him from his guest appearances on our episodes on The X-Files, I Want to Believe, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Suspiria, It Follows, The Mothman Prophecies, Personal Shopper, and I Saw the TV Glow. Please welcome back my husband, Ari Drew.
Hello.
Hello.
I was halfway waiting for you to do the my daughter Rebecca Ann Lehman introduction for me, because I've had a couple of people mention that they love it.
It's my husband.
I think that was like the first guess. I think that might have been either X-Files or like...
You've done it more than once.
I have done it more than once?
I think you
it's
have.
a recurring bit, baby.
Oh,
Yeah.
Listeners, I'm so sorry I let you down. I will remember that for Ari's next appearance next year.
Inevitably, yes.
Glad to be back, though. Thanks, guys.
Yes. Well, okay. So right off the bat, Ari. So you get your one guest appearance a year, or in last year, 2 because of I Saw the TV Glow. But what made you select this movie for your guest appearance?
I mean, if you're looking at the list of episodes I've appeared on, I think it's pretty clear that I really gravitate towards dark and kind of slow, complicated people doing complicated things. Types of films. And so this definitely fits in there. It's, I know for some people this movie is a bit messy. I absolutely love it. I think it's like, when I first saw it, I remember just feeling very taken by how it tells a really simple heartbreak story and kind of a story of revenge in a lot of ways. That's a lot more contained than I think the trappings would suggest. So, obviously we'll talk about that more, but I really appreciate that this movie kind of goes hardcore in some respects, but the story it's really telling at its core is very simple and to me very satisfying. So yeah, that's the long and short of that, but I love a messy film and this is no exception.
Well, I actually remember this getting because I said this is Tom Ford's sophomore feature, his first being A Single Man, which was like very, I love A Single Man so much. And it was very widely praised in 2009. And I remember this one getting a more muted reception.
Oh, yes.
But at the same time, I was looking at the reception, and honestly, it got tons of great reviews.
Mm-hmm. And it has a ton of them. If you look at the Rotten Tomatoes, there's like 270 reviews for this movie.
Yeah. So Joe, I guess then, did you see this when it came out?
So this played at TIFF, and this would have been either the first or the second TIFF that I was at when I moved to Toronto. So I remember seeing this with a crowd at a kind of star-studded gala. Ooh. And it was a big deal because people were so appreciative of his first film. And the reception was definitely mixed. I'm going to bring in a reference about the midway point, and we're going to talk about the opening, but yeah, like there were a bunch of people who said, oh, this is still gorgeous and beautiful, and yes, as you said, Ari, messy people doing messy things, but there were some cries of misogyny and fat phobia, so the movie had a rockier reception.
Yeah, I guess for me, like I think this is a movie where I was never fully won over on it until the final scene, and I felt this both times, because this is the second time I've seen this movie, and I do really like it actually quite a bit, but it kind of is that final scene that seals the deal for me.
Yeah, very much the same, and obviously we'll get there as we're talking about the plot, but I think that's kind of what sold it for me. And I'm not going to presume to be able to speak for other perspectives. And we'll get into all of that. But, but for me, I think like I've always just loved like a really kind of twisted love story, especially one that's sad. I think that's come up a few times here. And, I don't know. I'm really drawn to that. And I love like just kind of a knife twist. And the ending of this is very much that in a way that I really appreciate. I guess like I actually watched this movie probably like 3 times in the last year, including including rewatching this. I really, really like this movie. And if there's one thing that anyone needs to know about me, is that if I really like a movie, I will be watching that movie multiple times.
All the time.
Within a year. Yeah, very much so.
Well, let's dive in then, because I will say something I didn't know before starting this. I didn't know this was based on a book. So Nocturnal Animals is based on Austin Wright's 1993 novel, Tony and Susan. And I looked because the Wikipedia luckily has the plot laid out for me. It seems to be a pretty faithful adaptation too, but it was interesting because in my research, I was going to a lot of interviews with director Tom Ford, and he kept talking about how different the movie was from the book. And just looking at the plot, I was like, well, it does the same beats. So there's a couple big changes, like in the book, Susan is a housewife and has 3 kids. She's not like an art gallery person. The Jake Gyllenhaal's Tony character in the fictional book, he does remarry after his wife and child are raped and murdered. He becomes an insurance salesman, and in his inner story, he goes back and has an affair with one of his students. He's a college professor, blah, blah, blah. There's no abortion subplot in the book either.
Oh, that's big.
Yes. Yes. Then there's minor changes, like Tony's destination in the book is going to their vacation house in Maine instead of to Marfa, Texas. And I think that's a Tom Ford-ism because I didn't realize either, because in my head I kept thinking, oh, Tom Ford is a British fashion designer.
Right.
Nope, he's born in Austin, Texas.
Oh, yeah, he's not British at all.
I totally thought he was also British. So where did that come from?
He has a bit of a British look to him. He's very handsome.
He's very dapper. Yeah.
One other change that I think is just kind of like maybe notable, the character of Edward, who we will meet in flashbacks in the movie, but we never meet in the present, which is something I kind of love. He had puritanical views on sex, which I think caused conflict between he and Susan as well. So, and then the ending is a bit different, but I will detail that when we get to it. But
interesting. Sidebar. The idea of calling your book Tony and Susan, just like, wow. Who told anyone that was a good idea? Because that is a terrible title.
Well, and that's the thing, too. Like, Nocturnal Animals is the name of the book within the book in Tony and Susan. So it's like, it's right there.
It's right there, buddy. It's right there.
Anyway, so the movie rights for the novel were optioned to Universal Studios and later to HBO, though it was obviously never made. And Warner Books, now known as Grand Central Publishing, took the paperback rights for $400 $500,000 in a 2-day auction. So, like, this was in the 90s, a hot commodity.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So Tony and Susan was Warner's lead paperback fiction in September of 1994, but it did not sell well, with many believing its failure to be because it was, quote-unquote, too literary to be a mass-market offering.
Wow. So we were too stupid to get it.
Yeah, exactly. It was just too intellectual for all of us.
Right.
But in 2010, the book was published for the first time in the UK and enjoyed a critical revival, causing it to be reprinted in the United States. But
that's where Tom Ford found it when he was in the UK.
Yes.
Because he's British,
So
secretly.
it was
Wink.
between...
Took a second.
But it was between those two reissues when queer fashion designer, and we should emphasize queer, Tom Ford read the book at the suggestion of a friend. And he loved it and was attracted to the idea of an adaptation because he liked that it was, and I quote, a cautionary tale about coming to terms with the choices we make and the life that leaves with us. But he also really related to the character of Tony, saying, quote, as a kid growing up in Texas, again, born in Austin, I wasn't the macho football playing guy. I was the one people called weak. I was the sensitive one. I was the one who might have blinked out in a situation like the one Jake Gyllenhaal finds himself in. I related to that completely. So I like that he's kind of using his queerness as the connecting factor because, I mean, there is a lot of masculinity being questioned with that character.
Oh, yes. And folks, just in case you happen to have not watched the film in anticipation of this episode, I am going to caution, this is another case of like implied sexual assault. We get to see very brief flashes of it, but like the language is so confrontational. Like we're going to have a ton to say about the roadside escapade scene.
Which is a very effectively suspenseful scene.
Yes. Yeah. I would argue it's one of the strongest parts of this film.
Yeah, totally.
But also, everyone, if you have not seen this movie, be prepared to get confused with some names because there's a movie and then there's a book within the movie, but it's played by some of the same actors, so it might get confusing.
It's Doppelganger Central.
Yes. But anyway, so once the creative head of Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent, are y'all surprised I know how to pronounce that?
Did you practice that? Yeah,
no,
did you practice it?
I already knew. I wasn't going to call it Eva's. Wivas.
Versace.
But anyway, so he was once the head of those two fashion labels, and he's now the head of his own eponymous brand. But Ford made the switch over to film with the 2009 drama A Single Man, as we said. And Nocturnal Animals is his first and so far only follow-up to that film. And as for why it took 7 years for him to make another one, it started because, okay, I love this. He goes, well, I started doing women's wear, and I opened about 100 stores.
So he was busy.
But he also had a child waiting, and he wanted to wait for that child to turn 3 before he started looking at making another film.
Wow, stay-at-home dad.
Yes, but in the interviews for this film, like when he was doing the press tour, he was talking about potential future projects he was interested in, including, by the way, a comedy that he won't go into any detail on, but he says he wrote a comedy that everyone he has taken to has said it is too offensive, it can never get made, and even the title is obscene.
Oh.
It's movie 37 or 38, right?
Well, and I was like, okay, Mr. like fashion John Waters, like please give us whatever that movie is.
I'll take it. Yeah. Movie 43 is what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Thank you. But I imagine that this man, this celebrated fashion gentleman, probably doesn't want to torpedo his entire career over an offensive comedy.
Well, but the thing is, he wants to make it. He just can't get anyone to let him make it.
So maybe he should just team up with John Waters.
That's
then.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
John Waters can't get his new movie made either.
Oh my God, right? Team up. But so I think we would have gotten another movie, but unfortunately his husband, journalist Richard Buckley, died in 2021 after an extended illness. And they had been married since 2014, but had been together for over 30 years.
Oh,
yeah.
That's so sad.
It also is kind of interesting because he is best friends with Sam Taylor Johnson, Aaron Taylor Johnson's wife.
Ooh, lightning rod for controversy alert.
One of the interviews, they were like, because again, this is 2016 when this comes out, and they were like, oh, like, what did you think when she told you that she was with Aaron Taylor Johnson? And he kind of like goes, well, I mean, like, blah, blah, blah. But it's also because his husband was like 13 years his senior.
Okay, so he was like, I am also engaged in my own May-December romance.
Yeah, maybe not quite as big of a gap as the Taylor Johnsons, but still a gap nonetheless.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to the film. Ford was surprised to find out that no big studio was bidding against him for the novel's rights. And this is because it was after the British re-release of the novel, but before the American re-release. So I don't think like the American studios had really latched onto it yet.
They hadn't figured it out yet.
Exactly. So he snagged the rights himself using his own money. And he's like, oh yeah, like, I mean, like, honestly, it kind of sounds like the way he handles or approaches filmmaking is kind of how we approach podcasting sometimes, where it's like, oh, I have my like quote unquote day job, but then like, this is my side gig that I use that money to pay for.
Right. My side hustle money. Yeah,
exactly. So filming is his side hustle.
Jesus.
But he sat with the book for a couple of years trying to figure out how he was going to turn it into a film. And when he had only a few more months left in his option, he finally sat down to write it. So the book is an internal monologue, and we're actually hearing Susan's critique, the Amy Adams character's critique of the inner novel while we're reading the outer novel, which I think is a really interesting structure for a book. The closest comparison I could think of is Stephen King's Misery, where we are reading the new Misery book he's writing as the book is going on. But I've never read another book that does this.
Yeah, it sounds like he could definitely get a little confusing. Ooh, you know what? Maybe I'm tapping out. Maybe I'm just going to do a paperback, like an airport paperback. Too cerebral for me.
But Ford had to create a world for Susan and exaggerate things that are in the book in order to make them understandable for an hour and 50 minutes. Whereas, you know, in a thick 400 or 500 page book, you can linger over things. They can be more subtle than they can in a film format. You know, the typical adaptation things we always hear. But I love this too, because Ford says he thinks of everything in his films from a visual standpoint. So he wants his films to be able to be understood if the volume was muted.
Oh, I like that concept. That's really cool.
Which I did kind of want to watch this again with mute, like on mute with no subtitles, just to see, like if he succeeded in that.
I mean, if you do read the negative criticisms of this film, a lot of people say it is visually stunning, like really sumptuous and gorgeous to look at, but also that it sometimes feels too much like a perfume commercial. So I can maybe see it.
Yeah. Well, you know, maybe that's a case of the movie, like the book, being just a little too literary for mass market.
Maybe.
I mean, again, too, I think people going into a film, even despite the fact that, you know, Single Man is gorgeous, and I think it was very well received, that, you know, it's Tom Ford, and he's very known for fashion. And so, of course, like, people would be like, of course, yeah, well, this is just going to be a pretty film. I do think there's a lot more to it than just that.
Well, and I think, though, I mean, because a Single Man and Nocturnal Animals are very different, like, subject matters to deal with. And Nocturnal Animals has a mean streak to it that I don't, because Single Man's a very tender film.
For the most part,
Yeah. But anyway, so he thinks visually about what can be told through the shot. And so that's why we have so many moments in Nocturnal Animals where Amy Adams is just reading or thinking, or we're with her and there's no spoken words. Like, Amy Adams just kind of sits there and stares off into space a lot in this movie.
I was going to say, in my notes, I wrote, wow, what a queen. She basically got paid probably $3 million to lounge around this fucking gorgeous house porn mansion in the finest clothes. And it's all just like her in the bed, her in the bath, her by the fire. You're like, wow.
With the dark lipstick, looking very distraught.
Oh my God. She is so fucking vampy in this movie.
She
is
is.
Out of control.
Yeah. But Ford also thinks that any image that appears on screen needs to be worthy of being looked at, which I'm like, okay. And so he tends toward a very constructed frame and gives a lot of thought to the color of everything, to the look of everything. So again, fashion designer turned filmmaker. There you go. So filming takes place from October to December of 2015, but months before that, in May of 2015, Focus Features acquired the U.S. distribution rights for $20 million, making this the biggest deal of the 2015 Cannes Film Festival and one of the biggest of the mid-2000s.
Wow.
But that means they bought this before they even started filming.
Yeah, they bought it on his name in this cast.
Which I guess maybe that's something like they do at some film festivals where it's like, it's just like a sales pitch.
Yeah, it's proof of concept.
But Nocturnal Animals had its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival in September of 2016, where it won the Grand Jury Prize, and was released in 37 theaters on November 18th, 2016. Its widest release was on 1,200 screens in the second and third weeks of December, but outside of those 2 weeks, it never played on more than 200 screens.
They really thought that this was going to get a bunch of Oscars then.
Yeah, and it does get one Oscar nomination, Best Supporting Actor for Michael Shannon, but nothing else.
Oh, that's interesting. That wouldn't have been my pick, but I did see him get singled out in a lot of reviews as one of the better parts of the film.
Is your pick Gyllenhaal?
He's surprising. I would have actually said Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know why I didn't think about that, because he's not unrecognizable in this movie, but this is very much like, whoa.
This is him trying to break out. Like, he is trying to step out of the shadows and be like, I can do serious shit.
Yeah, I remember hearing that around the time that this came out, and you know, only knowing him from like Kick-Ass, and being like, oh, he's kind of like got a glow up going on, and then I realized like, oh, this man is like a man now.
It's a scary glow up, and why are my loins
and
tingling?
I like it.
Well, and it's so funny, Joe, because I remember when we covered Nosferatu, you were like, how is Aaron Taylor Johnson British, and he has the worst accent in this movie? And I think I combated you, but then I was watching this and I was like, okay, but his like Southern accent is better than his British accent.
100%. 100%. Yes.
So, okay, Nocturnal Animals winds up with a final domestic gross of $10.7 million and an international gross of $19.6 million, making for a worldwide total of $30.3 million.
Ooh, she's a flop, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's, well, a lot of this also is, I think, for its own money, so it's kind of like, like, maybe because he even says, I don't care if it's successful or not. I just want to make sure I made a good movie, and he thinks he does. So
I get that. That is so real, and I
the
think
art is more important.
I just love that. I mean, at the end of the day, again, you know, I mean, Trace knows this. Like, I don't give a shit about like box office discussions. Like, oh, but that flopped, because there's a number of times I brought up a film and that I love, and someone's like, oh, didn't that flop? I'm like, I don't give a fuck.
Well, so, okay, I want to be clear that whenever I bring up box office stuff, I'm never saying like, because I feel like this is sometimes what happens. People say, oh,
it's not
flopped.
Money equals good.
Yes, exactly. Like a box office flop must mean the quality of the film is bad. It's more so I just find box office like fascinating, like to see like where the public interest was at the time.
I think I just assume that anything I really, really love to this degree, like that's kind of nichey, like I recognize like I'm probably going to be in a minority, and that's not like, I don't know, just speaking to me, like whatever, like who am I in the context of like the whole movie going audience. But yeah, I think it's just an interesting talking point, you know, whenever we're talking about movies like this, because I think about it's like intention too. It's like, well, did Tom Ford really, you know, intend for it to be like some massive, you know, global success or whatever? And I think like it's nice to hear that it's kind of like, no, this is really more of a labor of love.
Yeah, it's a labor of love with an A+ cast.
Oh, hell yeah.
But I mean, also, because again, like it did fare well critically, and as I said, not as well as A Single Man. Like that's like, you know, you're like really high on Rotten Tomatoes. But here we got a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7 out of 10, and Letterboxd users have given it a 3.7 out of 5 or a 7.4 out of 10. So I mean,
these are better scores than a lot of other movies we've covered on the pod.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think maybe when people talk about this film as like, oh, it's a disappointment, I think it's always like the end of that sentence is compared to A Single Man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, one thing, I just love this. The movie is rated R for violence, graphic nudity, language, and menace.
That's up there with terror for me.
But also, are they saying the graphic nudity is from the opening scenes?
Yeah. Yeah, because you definitely do not see Aaron Taylor Johnson's dick when he's shitting on that porch.
I mean, but you do see poo.
You definitely see poo.
That might actually be part of that rating.
It's very menacing. His
pretty
poo.
Graphic, pretty menacing. I would say.
Need to see that.
Yeah, no. I forgot about that when that part happened. I was like, wow, they're really taking some time to watch this guy wipe.
I'm just saying, like, we know that Aaron Taylor Johnson will go full frontal. Like, I haven't seen A Million Little Things, but like I've seen the pictures of A Million Little Things, and it's like, okay, if you're gonna show us his shit, like
A Million Little
his
Pieces,
shit.
Trace.
True.
Oh, A Million
Little Pieces.
A Million Little Things is like the TV show, I think.
Yeah. You know what? It's because it's a fucking generic title that no one needs to remember.
Well, because I think when the show started, I was like, did they just make a movie out of this liar's novel?
Oh my God. Can you imagine? We're just throwing more money his way.
But anyway, that's what I got, Joe. So why don't you take us into this?
Okay. So I'm going to do a confession right off the top. The way that I ultimately look at this movie is a bit like Tom Ford doing a pastiche of David Lynch. And I don't know if that's just because we're recording this a couple of days after David Lynch's passing. He's very much top of mind for a lot of folks. But when I was rewatching it for this, all I could think of was, oh, this is basically a Lost Highway with shades of Mulholland Drive light.
I was curious because in an interview with Ford, he said that a lot of people compare his visual style to that of Douglas Sirk. And so he doesn't see it, but I was kind of like, I kind of see it. But now that you say David Lynch, I'm like, ooh, David Lynch and Douglas Sirk. Like,
Douglas Sirk,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we have alluded to it. This can be a sometimes complicated film if you're not visually tracking the different time periods. So I'm just going to say I will reference throughout the plot. We have 3 different timelines. I'm using air quotes. Mm-hmm. We have the present, which is when Susan is married unhappily to Hutton. That's the Armie Hammer character, and she is reading Edward's book. Yes.
Jump scare. I forgot he was in this.
I forgot he was in this too.
Totally. I mean, it's a bit of a nothing role, but whatever.
Well.
Then we also have the book. So the scenes that she is reading play out with other characters, as you alluded to, Trace. And then we also have scenes from the past. So this is basically the courtship, marriage, and then the dissolution of the marriage between Susan and Edward.
Which I have to ask, did y'all immediately clock it was a flashback when we first have the scene of the meet cute with Adams? And okay, I did not. And I was like, what? And then I was like, wait, this is supposed to be 20 years ago?
Look at her. I think that the movie does kind of like a very, it's like a very like obvious, like, oh, look, she's not wearing the dark lipstick, so she's not mean yet.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Your visual cues, I'm sorry.
I will say, though, I fully expected her to have, like, a bit of a more dramatic change in hair. Like, I think they just moved the part to another side, and I thought, come on, guys.
I think so. No, and they pulled it behind her ears because I whenever she's later in the film about to, ostensibly meet up with him, she's like softening her hair by pulling it closer to her face, and
yeah.
They should have pulled that wig off of Laura Linney and put it on Amy Adams.
Fucking bouffant.
She was dressed for some kind of a wild stage play that, like, she walked straight from that set to this set, I feel like.
Oh, truly. Like the Lifetime version of what, Mary Lou Retton or something?
I'm telling y'all right now, this is actually the funniest thing I found about this movie. So the way that Tom Ford found Laura Linney for this role, when he was looking for actresses, he was just Googling greatest U.S. American actresses.
Kathy Bates was booked.
And so he got to Laura Linney, but then he was like, honestly, like, I didn't know how she was going to do it. Like, they based her accent on Lady Bird Johnson, but he was like, I would have written more for her to do if I thought this is what I was going to get.
Right.
Has he never heard of Laura Linney before this?
That is wild. Never heard of her.
She serves
came up
every
my
time.
Google list.
At the goddamn University of Texas.
Oh, I love it. That reminded me, well, because I'm a big, like, and this is, like, again, another controversial film, whatever, Life of David Gale, and it's very her accent. That movie all takes place, like, in Texas, in the Austin area.
Okay, I'm sorry, not to tangent that, but Andrew, do you think that has aged well? Like, would it be maybe, besides the Kevin Spacey of it all, like, would the story age well today?
I think it's like a really fucked up story of someone manipulating, maybe like some laws or some politically motivated goals. So in that sense, it's like not like a movie about people doing good things, doing good things in the name of their causes. I just think it's like so like fascinating and salacious the way it plays out. Yeah. And so it's not, I don't look at that movie in a very moralistic way. I just think it's extremely entertaining way of like throwing out some commentary, but ultimately just saying, fuck you, we're just telling a really fucked up story.
Yeah. Joe, because you haven't seen that movie, right?
No, I've seen it.
Okay, yeah.
But explain it, because there's many a listener who are probably saying, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
I'm sorry. Well, The Life of David Gale is basically like Kevin Spacey's on death row. He calls reporter Kate Winslet, and he's like, hey, I'm going to tell you what really happened, because he's on the trial for the murder of Laura Linney. And it's definitely a movie where I think once the twist is revealed, you will either turn on the movie or you will be into the movie, much like me and Ari are.
It's one of those movies like of an era that I think it like so much hinges upon the twist being like a moment that makes the film. It kind of reminds me a bit of like, there's some other films around this time, like The Life Before Her Eyes with Uma Thurman and Evan Rachel Wood, where it's like literally the last bit of the movie, the twist reveal, totally recontextualizes the film, which is what that movie does too. And I guess I've always just appreciated a film like that, even if people are like, well, this is cheap or this is like manipulative. I'm like, I don't give a shit.
I don't even think it's that. I think it's, especially with The Life Before Her Eyes case, which does school shootings. I think because it's Life of David Gale with death penalty, Life Before Her Eyes with school shootings, it's I think people consider it very tacky.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and they have heightened opinions about it, right? Because they are really relevant topics to a lot of people. Like, we have experienced something about that in our lifetime.
Yeah, and I think I think that there are certain topics, and this is something I will always disagree with because again, with just generally the freedom of artistry and freedom of speech, like, I think you should be allowed to make a film about whatever you want. Granted, like, if you're putting content out there that's, going to turn a lot of people off or push buttons, you're going to expect pushback from that and expect for people to probably really come out against you. And that's kind of comes with the territory. I just don't think that that's reason enough to not do something or make something. And I do think that with certain topics like, like controversial, really divisive topics like the death penalty, school shootings, which maybe are less controversial, maybe they're just kind of sensitive topics,
bushy,
dealing with human life and, the sanctity of that. But I think that, the view of like, no, that we should never be able to make it's exploitative. I think that's the argument ultimately.
Yeah.
But it's just such a fine line though, because again, we're talking about,
well, it's a matter of taste, too, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This week's sponsor is the new film, The Monkey. Based on Stephen King's iconic short story, The Monkey has been brought to the screen by Osgood Perkins, the writer-director of Longlegs, and horror master James Wan. Stephen King himself has described The Monkey as batshit insane and said you've never seen anything like it. And Bloody Disgusting calls it the most outrageous horror movie of the year. The Monkey opens in theaters everywhere on February 21st.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply. USAA.
This episode is brought to you by Peloton. If you're looking for flexible workouts, Peloton's got you covered. Summer runs or playoff season meditations. Whatever your vibe, Peloton has thousands of classes built to push you and has something there to adapt with you whether you need a challenge or rest. Peloton has everything you need whenever you need it. Find your push. Find your power. Peloton. Visit onepeloton.com.
Well, actually, Ari, that is a fantastic segue because this movie opens with controversy.
Yeah.
So, folks, the credits play over slow motion images of fat, naked women dancing while glitter sprays on them. And we do actually not so quickly establish that this is actually a art installation in Amy Adams's gallery. And she's kind of like looking around at this opening, but it does take quite a while. Like, we have to watch the whole credits unfold as we watch these women. And this was heavily critiqued when the film came out.
And this is a Tom Ford idea, because this is not in the books, because Susan's character is not like an artist exhibitionist thing. But
well, can I explain it? Because I did find an article that he did with Vulture in the wake of the controversy.
Go ahead.
Okay, so he explains the whole thing, as in the film, is a bit of a fairy tale, and these women are sort of witches that lead you in. They're the Valkyrie, in a sense. They cast a spell on the entire film, so there was a lot of different reasons for that sequence, and not least of all, it grabs the audience at the very beginning and gets them into the story. Okay, and then he elaborates on this further. So politics being what they are right now, as in 2016, I want to make a statement about America. America was always tan, beautiful teeth, tits, and ass. So guess what? I want to talk about America today. Gluttonous, overfed, aging, sad, tired. Bear with him, because yes, this is like the kind of shit that you say, it gets you into some fucking hot water.
Yeah.
So then he says, I actually felt guilty that had been my original intention, because when he then worked with these women, he found them so beautiful, so joyful, and so happy to be there. They were so uninhibited. And I realized that actually they were a microcosm of what the whole film was saying. They had to let go of what our culture had said they're supposed to be. And because of that, they were so totally free. So he actually ended up feeling like these women were really beautiful, and he wanted that to be the statement. It's like, you don't have to live under the constraints of what other people say you need to be or what you need to look like, which is what Susan needs to learn over the course of this film.
I think that's so fascinating, and I appreciate that context, Joe, because when I first saw this movie, I remember being really taken aback by just kind of, obviously opening shots and how this how this opens up. And I think it's really funny because I think that your reaction to it and how quote unquote shocked people are, it says more about it.
Us, right?
Yeah, it says more about the audience, and I think it does about anyone involved in it, especially, including the actresses who took those roles voluntarily, so it's really, I think that's really interesting. And I love, kind of like the reappraisal of that on his part, that it is very reflective of this idea of like, turning kind of typical roles on their head and owning it. And I think that there's like kind of a, what is the word? Like a rebellious attitude that this movie has in that way. But yeah, anyhow, I'm just meandering now. But yeah, I appreciate that context quite a bit.
I think my fear is that without that interview, I definitely took this opening the wrong way. Like, it did feel a little exploitative. It felt like shocking for shock value, and I wasn't really sure how to feel about it, especially since we don't really talk much about the art. Like, there's a scene later when Amy Adams' character talks to Carlos, the Michael Sheen character, and they talk about her work, and she says, yeah, I don't really fucking care. Like, it's all schlocky and tacky. And I thought, well... But then you have to realize this is also the character saying that, right? Trace, you love to do this. It's the character versus the film saying it.
I will say this, because I watched this. Admittedly, Joe, because I feel like I forgot this was the opening of the movie until you reminded me about it before I rewatched it. But you had mentioned that there was controversy about it. And I admit, I think I have a tendency when people tell me that I should be outraged about something that I'm
it's
kind
not
of
that
like...
shocking.
Yeah, I'm like, no, like, y'all need to calm your tits. Like, it's fine.
Right.
So take that as I say this. So I was watching this, and yes, when it opens, I was like, wow, that is the first image we are seeing in this movie is this nude fat woman in a majorette costume with kind of gross lipstick on her lips, to be honest. But honestly, as it kept going, I was like, but this is kind of neat. Like, what other movie is going to put like fat women, like nude fat women on display like this? And I didn't feel like the film was mocking them, but I say that knowing, again, my mentality where I'm like, well, but people are upset and it's not that bad.
I think the other condition was like, if this had been made by a woman, if it had been written by a woman, like, unfortunately, we still very much have this tendency that, okay, well, this is a man who works in fashion. He's talking about small sizes. Amy Adams is the lead of this film, and she's stunningly gorgeous throughout the entire film. So I think it was easy for people to say, oh, well, you're very much casting two different lenses here, like fat, gross, ew, versus, sleek, svelte, sophisticated. And I think for some people that was, oh, okay, well, this is giving off not good misogynistic vibes.
But I like what you said. I do think you're right, though. I think it says more about the people watching it than the film itself as to what your reaction is to this movie. I do agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the arguments around like immediately saying, crying misogyny, which again, there's obviously other points in the film where that argument maybe is stronger, but again,
we'll get there.
Oh yeah. But it's, I think it's kind of like it's doing what art does. It's like whether, the initial intention was this or not. I mean, we're watching this movie now, like 8+ years, almost 9 years later. So, the context of that, like a lot of things have shifted. The ways we talk about some of these things, the ways we debate, kind of the validity of, oh, well, is this valid art, or is this actually just really exploitative schlock or whatever? I think that's always going to be like stuff that's interesting to me. Like the dialogue around it is always going to be a bit more interesting than probably the intention ever was.
Well, and I think tensions in our country, at least, were definitely on the rise because, again, take into account when this comes out. This comes out the end of Trump's first year in office. And, Joe, I think you said right before Me Too, right? Yeah. So, like tensions were on the rise at this point.
Yeah. Okay, so this is setting the stage. So we've got some provocative art. You could say it's, confronting and so on. And Susan is completely disconnected from all of this. Like, she frankly looks bored until I learned this was her art gallery, like she was the curator of it. I thought that she had been
An attendee.
forced here against her will. Like, oh God, when do I
Someone
get to leave
has a
this
gun
party?
behind her.
I also just like seeing Amy Adams play this type of role. Like, I mean, like,
Same.
we can be up front here. Like, Susan is not what we would call a likable character at all in this movie.
Not especially.
She's also not particularly personable. And I say that, like,
She's
as an
not warm.
audience member. Yeah.
She's a bit of a drip. I mean, she's clearly very, like, you know, she's really disenfranchised, I think, with so much of her life, and
Yes.
and is depressed and is just not doing well. And I think that shows in so many ways.
Yeah, she's sleepwalking.
But at the same time, and maybe I could say this question for the end, but I'm going to ask it now. Do y'all empathize with Susan in this movie?
Absolutely.
Ooh.
I think I would say that I empathize with every single person in this movie, like, you know, on either side of the relationship, in the sense of, like, I can understand, you know, kind of the yes and it, the duality of, yeah, I can be someone who made a decision that I thought was the best one for me and for my life, and be wrong.
And then learned.
Yeah, and then be wrong, and then just be, you know, be actually very tormented by it, and have to live that life. And you know, it's whether I think the question will come up at some point, like, oh, do you think that, you know, what happens is deserved or something like that? You know, I think that's ultimately the question. And
I like that the film doesn't give us an answer. It doesn't let us make up our own minds about that, because I think there's a danger to this kind of movie that says, oh, well, you know, this bitch just wanted to be rich and she got it, but look, she's still unhappy, which is definitely one of those Douglas Sirkisms, right?
Yes, but there are also moments where she acknowledges the mistake she made, and like she even says to her assistant, you know, like I did something unforgivable to this person. And so it's a thing where at the end of the day, I do think she quote unquote deserves what she gets at the end, but I still feel bad for her because I've seen her in this film realize that I think she knew before the movie started that she made a mistake, but like, it's just,
she's known for years.
Yeah. And so, but I think that's what makes reading, or I guess in our case, watching this whole book play out so cathartic for both us and her, is that we're kind of on this same journey with her.
well, also too, because at the outset, just kind of like knowing that this book, he straight up is like, you inspired me.
Yeah.
And it's like,
dun, dun.
oh, what is going to happen? And then you're seeing this, you're like, holy fuck. Yeah, that's how she inspired you. That's really dark shit.
Yeah, like, oh, she ruined your life, and then you wrote a book about her.
But I will. I mean, again, she never like really quite apologizes because we never meet Edward in the present timeline. But again, just those little moments where she acknowledges, like, and she seems like she doesn't ever really say she's remorseful, but like, I don't know, maybe it's because it's Amy Adams. Like, she's giving off an aura.
It's all in the face.
Yeah, a little bit. So I do find empathy with her, but at the same time, I find the ending very cathartic.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that this is kind of the general. I like that you asked that question, because I do think that that's something that's worth talking about when we're discussing films in general, because I think there's been so much polarized and black and white thinking that goes into how we evaluate characters, how we evaluate like what a film quote unquote is saying,
especially ones that are involving like complicated women.
Totally. Oh, totally. And I'd say complicated people in general, but especially complicated women.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to see women presented in a certain unfavorable light and to not feel a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, that's actually really fucked up and sexist, when in reality it may just be very reflective of this one story and this character, and what, you know, like that there's a different purpose to show this. So it's complex, and I think that people would do well to kind of ask themselves those questions, like, can I find the empathy for all sides of this? You know, maybe not Aaron Taylor Johnson, because he's a huge piece of shit in this.
It's a good thing he's hot. Good thing everybody in this is so hot.
Oh, yeah. It's an easier pill to swallow.
Yeah. Okay, so we do get to see her as she, you know, makes her way home. She lives in this gated community. We're getting beautiful aerial shots of Los Angeles and the highways and stuff. So it's beautiful but isolating. Like at all points, you just kind of realize there's so much empty space around people, or they're always by themselves. And it's just like, oh, these folks are living lives, but not with other people.
Well, especially Susan. Like, I mean, I think that after the 30-minute mark of this movie, she's never with another person again.
Right?
Oh, yeah. No, and I think that I love that. I love that, kind of too, like LA as this kind of very isolating space at times for people.
Especially like, we could do famous landmarks, but instead we're choosing to show, oh, look, it's just like people on the highway, which is a very LA thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, oh, it is so pretty. But you just imagine like no one's making connections because they're all on the go, but they're not interacting.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, much like Susan, it's not warm.
No, it's not warm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the morning, she gives herself a paper cut when she opens the proof of the manuscript that Edward has sent her. And in my notes, I just wrote, he's drawn first blood.
Yeah, it's like, that's some unsubtle symbolism, but it's fine. I like it.
And then we're introduced to her husband, Hutton, who, as we said, is played by Armie Hammer. And yeah, this is kind of a perfect role for him in hindsight because
Playing himself probably to some degree.
like he's hot, so gorgeous, totally aloof, clearly already having an affair from the moment we meet him. You're just like, oh, you're going to New York to do business? It's like, we don't even need to give him a job because we just know your shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we do get some exposition from the scene, though. So Susan and Edward have been separated for 19 years. The current marriage is not going well between Susan and Hutton. P.S. Hutton. It's just such a rich name.
I know. A douche name.
What a douche. I mean, it's is it that different from Armie Hammer? I mean, it's Armand Hammer,
Yeah.
But I do love the fact that it's like they're secretly broke. So they're also living this life that is a complete facade, right? Like it's a total sham. So the marriage is a sham. The richness is a sham. Her job is a sham. This woman is living a lie.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much, she's materialistic and she is not happy with that in the long run, even though she was 20 years ago. And we also learned like she and Edward haven't spoken in 19 years, but she tried to call him once and he hung up on her.
Right. Yeah. As you do with an ex. Okay, so we get a house party, and Susan is gossiping with her friend Alicia, who is played by Andrea Riseborough, but you would not know it because she is wearing the fucking 1970s party city wig and like a statement chunky jewelry necklace. Like, honestly, it feels like she's out of a 1970s movie.
I
thought they were at a costume party. I couldn't like place why they're all dressed like crazy.
And you're just like, no, this is regular life. Apparently, she just looks this way.
It's the art world. It's like
it's
that.
LA, yeah.
I was thinking it reminds me a bit of like, kind of the styling in Jake Gyllenhaal, the other art movie, that one that came out on Netflix.
Velvet Buzzsaw.
But like that kind of like heightened, like, oh, this is what it's really like in the art world. Everyone dresses crazy.
Yeah,
now,
it's like verging on Zoolander.
But
yeah.
But Riseborough is like, again, you're right, Joe, this Party City like wig that she's wearing. But I didn't look this up. Is a psychopharmacologist a real thing? Okay,
so psychopharmacology, I clocked that as soon as she said it. Psychopharmacology is literally the study of being able to prescribe it's like medications, essentially.
Okay.
So a psychopharmacologist is essentially a psychiatrist.
I
don't know if
gussied it up.
or technically like I guess like a psychiatric nurse practitioner, or even just your like, technically, if your primary care physician is prescribing you, Zoloft or something, then
they're a psychopharmacologist.
So psychopharmacology is like, I don't know of anyone who's like, oh, I work as a psychopharmacologist. It's like, no, I work as a psychiatrist probably, or a physician of some sort that prescribes. Okay. So I was like, yeah, I've never heard of that unless there's like some LA thing where it's like, no, there are just very specific psychopharmacologists that you go to get your cocktail of, mental health drugs.
Maybe it's also just like that use of the word is like, oh, it's so LA. Like it's a very fancy term for a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's either that or we're in a David Cronenberg film and somebody's going to grow something out of an armpit in about 20 minutes.
But that being said, though, I mean, so I do, this conversation's great. And I love, this is also where I start to empathize with the Susan character, even though we haven't learned the full extent of what she has done yet. But she says, this is her materialistic speech. She says, I feel ungrateful not to be happy. And it's just that acknowledgement that endears me to the character.
She does have a level of self-awareness. She just seems to have this passivity where she refuses to grant herself agency to actually change anything about her life.
I think she hates herself, though. I think she feels like she doesn't deserve anything better than this sometimes.
Right.
But I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too lenient with her.
You're Amy Adamsing it to such a degree, right? I mean, here's the thing. I think that this is incredibly strategic and spot on casting for her because we love Amy Adams. And typically she does not play roles like this. So we have this inherent goodwill towards her, even though she's playing a character who's like not very great.
Well, and bear in mind, this is doing like the award circuit the same time that Arrival is, and two
perfect
completely.
movie.
Arrival.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't revisited it because I cried so hard the first time I watched it.
It's
So
everything.
good.
I love it.
We should note that, she is having this conversation with Carlos. This is Michael Sheen, and this is Alicia's gay husband. And they just have this agreement that's working out really well. And not going to lie, they do seem to have the best relationship in this entire movie.
100%. Because it's a partnership. It's just not a sexual one.
As far as we know.
Oh, yeah. As far as we know, yeah. Well, I feel like she says gay specifically. So I don't know. Maybe.
We don't know. Yeah. So Carlos is quizzing Susan about whether or not she still loves her husband, Hutton, but she manages to successfully dodge the question, which basically is the answer.
Yeah, that's the answer.
So they're sitting down for dinner. Yeah, they talk about her opening. He's actually quite enthusiastic about it. And she's like, oh, I actually thought it was kind of shit. But they do agree to call it junk culture. Like, clearly this is something that is not adding anything to the art world, to the dialogue or anything like that. So they're pretty down on this. But he does encourage her to enjoy the absurdity of their world. I guess I thought that this was interesting, if only because we're about to go into a completely different kind of world, right? That is not absurd. It is gritty and realistic. Well, almost like to a fault. Like it almost becomes its own crime film.
Yeah, because I almost feel like Ford was channeling the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men in the book sequences.
Yeah. Or I saw a lot of people say it's almost Tarantino-esque, like early Tarantino. But I think it's just because it's like ultra violence mixed with a little bit of maybe political satire and just provocative, right?
Yeah, provocative's a good word.
Okay, so that night, Susan puts on her own chunky glasses so that she can read this book, Nocturnal Animals. And then we cut. So we are in the book world now. And I'm not going to lie, I didn't watch this movie with subtitles on, and I felt like I had a different reading of every single character's name except for Susan and Edward throughout. So the daughter's name is India Hastings, but I could have sworn to God that they were always pronouncing it Andia Hastings. And I was like,
it's the accent.
It's the twang. Yeah,
it's the accent.
The twang. Yeah.
Andia.
Yeah.
Anyway, she is played by Ellie Bamber, and she is driving with her parents, Lara and Tony. And of course, I will say, I think that this is like the funniest bit of casting.
Oh, it's
amazing. You've got Amy Adams, and then you've got her stand-in,
Isla
Fisher.
Which, like, oh my God, I just remember, like, during Wedding Crashers times back in the day, I remember being like, these women look so much alike. Isn't that the woman from the other thing?
Meanwhile, I'm like, that's Shaggy's girlfriend, Mary Jane from Scooby-Doo.
Oh my God. Of course you were. Yes. Of course.
But I was, because I really like Isla Fisher, and I feel like her and Sacha Baron Cohen still married, or are they divorced now?
No,
they're
divorced.
divorced.
Okay. Because I remember a friend made Ari and I watch that Harmony Korine movie, The Beach Bum, and I was like, oh
yeah.
Because I don't really like Matthew McConaughey, and he's the lead, and I was like, oh, fine. But like, Isla Fisher was like getting me through that movie, but she's also barely in it. And I felt the same way when I watched this. Where I was like, oh, Isla Fisher. Oh, wow, she's not in the movie.
That movie is charming as fuck, though. If you've never seen it.
I whenever you think of a Harmony Korine movie, it's not The Beach Bum.
It's not
it is
very
like
much not.
It's kind of like a plotless comedy from Harmony Korine that I did like, and I don't like Spring Breakers. So that's I know. Like,
I love Spring Breakers.
We can cover it, Joe. I might come around on it. I've only seen it once in theaters, and I've never seen any other Harmony Korine film. But I was so put off and bored by Spring Breakers that I was really confounded by all the praise it got.
I think sometimes with Harmony Korine too, like I think it's really easy to home in on like a very what is it, like a grading part of the movie,
Yes.
and not be able to like look away from that and evaluate the movie beyond that, because like the Spring Break Forever, the repetition of that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I remember Trace very specifically just kind of like being
Sighing.
over that right when
Not
it
my
started.
jam.
Yeah.
Like in the theater, I was that person going, ugh.
Oh, no.
Yeah, super pleasant. Yeah, I love that.
I was really not enjoying myself. I think I was also really mad though, because I was like, it's Selena Gomez doing a bad. Well, she's not the bad girl in that movie, but I hate that she just leaves the movie 40 minutes in.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
No, she does a great job in it until then.
She's good and
true.
then she's gone. But anyway,
Anyhow.
Somehow we're like 2 movies over. We've moved 2 tangents over.
this is just how Ari and I talk.
Okay, so we are driving through West Texas overnight, and
Where I grew up.
Well,
Oh,
Ari, I
so
was gonna say though,
fucking scary territory is what you're saying.
this doesn't look like the West Texas we drive through though. It looks a bit like it looks more California-y.
I don't think it was filmed in West Texas. I don't think it actually was filmed there. But
this was filmed in.
But
like,
the truth is that
California.
like if you drive from something like Austin to where I grew up at College Town, Texas, in Lubbock, which is in the Panhandle, it is like almost 6 hours of mostly nothing. And it's very easy to like kind of get stuck like on stretches of road where there's not really gas stations, where you don't really have service. I've had many times of that. So like I think one thing I appreciate about the kind of this opening of the book is that I can feel that, like that fear of kind of like, ooh, if I cross the wrong person on this 2-lane highway, like this is going to be some scary shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. So we're driving down the highway, and we end up getting blocked behind 2 cars that are driving parallel at a slow speed. So what ensues is a little bit of kind of Frogger. We end up getting into a fender bender, high-speed chase. We end up in the ditch, and you think, okay, this is obviously not a good situation. These people were clearly baiting a hook, like they wanted something like this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just gets worse because the driver of the vehicle, Ray, who is Aaron Taylor Johnson, gets out, and now we're into one of those, okay, you're in a situation with somebody that you can't predict how they're going to react. They're not acting rationally. Like, it's very heavy confrontation, masculine overtones, threats of violence, threats of rape. So I just think that this scene, like, this is worst nightmare scenario for me. It activates me.
Well, and I think, again, like, because this isn't what I would necessarily call a horror movie, but this scene specifically is right out of a horror movie.
It's something about it that it's very like Zodiac-y, like whenever the scene wherever she gets picked up by the supposed Zodiac killer, and he's like, I'm gonna throw your baby out of the window, and then I'm gonna blah blah blah. Like, he says all these terrible things. Like, just the way that tension builds is very much like the scene. It's almost like, I'm trying to think of it like The Hitcher, like something kind of like that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I appreciate about it is that it's sustained. Like, you kind of keep waiting for a break in the tension, and you really don't get that because you think the car stuff is going to be the end of it. And then we get out of the car, and these guys are saying, oh, we're going to help you with the flat tire. And then we'll go and talk to the cops about the fender bender and the accident. And you know that they're lying.
Yeah.
And Tony, the Jake Gyllenhaal stand-in, knows that they're lying. And the women are scared. But we still have to go through the routine because there's no other way to get out of the situation. And that inevitability and how we just have to sit and watch it unfold is really excruciating.
But at the same time, I actually will come in the movie for this. Like, we're not really relishing in the violence against these women. We will not see the sexual assaults they endure. And so Ford is able to maintain this level of tension and suspense and just dread without really exploiting any of the violence.
Interesting that you say that. I have a piece I'll bring in a little bit later after the women are confirmed dead. Maybe we can have a combo about it.
Feel free to disagree. I guess maybe I'm thinking, like, I've seen other movies with similar situations to this where it is much more graphic.
No, I agree with you. I think
Absolutely.
kind of given to, especially how the film starts off, I would have expected it to be kind of like a little more heavy-handed, like overt, kind of like almost extreme violence. But I think that it's really a testament to how they capture the world of the novel very differently than the real world.
Yeah, like, this is so clearly not the universe that
Yeah.
we have seen Susan living in, even though it does still feel, I think, real in a nightmarish worst case scenario kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so what do we think about the way that these men are treating Tony? Because, Trace, you led with that Tom Ford quote about how he sees himself as this character. And these men, they punch him when he tries to stand up for his wife and daughter, but they're also saying things like, "Do you have a vagina?"
Yeah, we're doing a lot of that in this movie. And it will continue with the cops, just albeit in like a less profane way. Like, we don't really get to know Edward, but the real life Jake Gyllenhaal character in this movie. But just by knowing that this is the character that's his stand-in, it's like, I don't know. I also feel like there's a self-hatred there almost that he shares with the Susan character.
Yeah. I think that's really fascinating because like what that's saying to me is that he's telling her, you know, this isn't me trying to show you. I think like the biggest tell in him writing this and dedicating it to Susan is being like, this is how you make me look at myself. This is how you've made me. This is what you've done to me. It has nothing to do with the fact that the wife and the daughter meet a really horrific end. I think it has more to do with like, I want to just show you, because I am clearly this character, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Like, this is kind of it's like this consistent emasculation.
Yeah.
And then just to the point that he is just kind of like there are parts where in the, you know, as it progresses between him and Michael Shannon trying to kind of solve this and catch the guys, like that it's, you know, I want to yell at him and shake him and be like, dude, come on, get it together. Like, we got to do something about this. And so I even found myself being like, come on, you know, get your panties out of a wad and go do what you need to do. But I think that's really interesting that's what that evokes.
But at the same time, and again, whenever he's telling the cops what happened, and they're like, "Oh, you mean like they came out and said your wife wants to see you, and you didn't say anything? You just stayed hidden?" And I was like, "Yeah, obviously he stayed hidden. Like, what the fuck was he like? No, they were gonna kill him if he stepped out there." But
the alternative is death.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do? Like, be a big man and, you know, whip my dick out and show my big balls and be like, okay, I'm dead.
But that's why I was so taken aback, and I turned off of the Michael Shannon character in that moment. At first, I warmed to him kind of because he's just a funny character.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I'm like, are y'all really like coming down on this man's like ability to be a father, a husband, a man, like because he didn't jump out when he was driven and abandoned in the middle of the desert? Like, fuck you.
Well, and not to put the two of you on the spot, but because you do have a relationship to Texas, is this... like, is that folding into the kind of masculinity? Like, there's very much a Western feel to this, a kind of cowboy. Like, you need to become a vigilante and man up.
Totally. I would say totally, yeah.
More so for you, Ari, than me. Because, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Houston, so I was not in this...
Yeah.
Like, I had a very...
Not so much this world?
Not this world. No. But I've driven through several times since I've been with Ari.
It's scary. It's like, it's
the
really...
equivalent of I have a black friend.
Yeah. I've seen it from the safety of the inside of my car.
I will say it is very... I mean, to this day, and especially now, you know, during these times of, like, political divisiveness and unrest, like it is very scary for me to drive and like get gas on the way back home whenever I'm going through these like really rural areas. And I've been pulled over before by cops that I was very afraid of, but you know, and have had just weird, you know, people give you weird looks. And so it's, you know, I think for me, like this whole part of the story within the film is like very affecting in that way, because it just feels horrific. Like it just continues to build in this terrible way. And I can see, you know, a reality where that does happen in Texas. Like you get in the wrong, you know, kind of little town where the sheriff's on an ego trip, or like, you know, certain people in the community are protected and they can do whatever they want. I mean, it's not just, you know, unique to Texas. There's obviously other areas in rural United States where those things do happen. But yeah, I guess for me, like it definitely does kind of resonate in that way.
I truly also feel like the whitest person ever, because I'm like, this is my worst nightmare. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people who are like, bitch, I'm living this existence every day.
Yeah, welcome to every day.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll just check my privilege there.
You have a lot of forests and trees. You know, you can get lost up there. There's monsters.
Yes. Constantly afraid of woodland cannibals up here in Canada. Yeah. Okay, so this sequence goes on, as I said, for a little bit, but it does end when all of the men, except for Lou, who is played by Carl Glusman, or Glusman.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, so Carl Glusman is from one of my faves. He's the husband in Watcher.
So,
Yes.
all right, you're going to love this. I messaged Joe, and I was like, I kept trying to figure out why I hated this guy so much. And obviously,
Residual hatred.
Obviously, like, you hate him in this movie because he's a bad guy, but there was just something about this, like, I kept zeroing in on this guy. Why do I hate him?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's a husband and Watcher.
Yeah. Oh my God. So good. Folks, revisit Watcher. And Chloe Okuno has, I think, a new movie coming out this year. So I'm very excited.
And remember, this is Watcher, not the Watcher, not the Watchers.
Very important distinction.
He was in this guy, too. He was in The Idol, that recent controversial series with the Weeknd. Yeah, so he has an interesting picker. He also, for those who want to, see some salacious stuff, he does go full frontal in the film Love.
Oh, the Gaspar Noé movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Also, I'm assuming controversial.
Oh, totally. That movie is so graphic, yeah.
So they hop in the car with Lara and the daughter, and then they drive off, and we are just left with Lou and Tony. I keep wanting to say Edward, but it's Tony. And we should note that as soon as the wife and daughter are driven off, this is where we get our first break. So we're back in the present with Susan. She whips off the glasses. She's distraught of what she's reading. But it's very clear that we're already starting to make a connection between Tony's experiences and her. And we will see that visually represented throughout the film, where like there's match on action between the fictitious character and her. So I guess, Ari, I thought it was so fascinating that you said the book is this representation of how she made Edward feel, because she is going through these experiences with his fictional stand-in. So I kind of love that. Like we're getting the narrative piece of it, but then visually it's also like, make sure you're seeing the connection here. Like this is the journey she's on, is to understand how much it hurts.
Which is why, she's progressively like just more distraught and like really disorganized. You can tell mentally. And yeah. She's unraveling.
And I love, again, but she's unraveling in all, because basically what happens is, again, if you've never seen this movie, we're in the book storyline, something intense happens, and then we just cut to Susan slamming the manuscript shut. And I love it every time it happens, to be honest.
Or gasping, or something falls, and it's it's very jarring every time.
But like we are with her, watching her as she gets more and more like upset. But it's not just because of the content of the book, it's because she is piecing this together with her own life, with Edward. And so again, I think that's again where I'm bringing this back to kind of the empathy for Susan, where I'm like, I get it, man. Like, yeah, you kind of deserve what you're getting, but it's the
you're going through it.
Yeah, but it's that awareness where she's saying, like, because I do think in some sense Susan thinks she deserves this.
Yeah.
What's interesting too is that we're saying the silent part out loud, because she never comes. Like she never verbalizes this. She never has a breakdown where she confesses everything to Hutton. She doesn't write it out in an email that she sends to Edward. Like, you either get it from Amy Adams's performance, or you leave this movie thinking, that was a bit fast out.
Which, for me, I do get it from Amy Adams. So I guess that's what I was saying, though. Is we just cut away, and there's no dialogue. We are just in a close-up of Amy Adams looking off into the distance or at something, and we have to glean everything from those moments. And for me, I do get that. They work for me, but I guess I can understand how someone maybe doesn't pick that up from these scenes, or maybe they interpret it differently.
And I kind of want to hold on to that for when we do get to the end, because I think you have maybe a more generous read on it than some other people who were like, no, it just never got there for me.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so one other important thing to note about this, when she does have this reaction, we're back in the present. It's now about 4 a.m. and she's upset. So she calls Hutton, her husband, who is in New York, and she catches him as he is getting into the elevator with a woman that he is clearly about to fuck. And we are in a very pricey hotel because the elevator has a elevator operator who is played by Evan Bittencourt. And I love this gay as fuck moment where she calls Hutton and she's like, oh, that's not the usual room, blah, blah, blah. And this elevator operator, who you know is a total mo, just goes, ma'am, this is your floor. Just like letting Susan know your husband's cheating on you.
Just with like full casualness and glee a little bit. Like, oh, yep, have fun with that.
I think she's starting to suspect something. Your wife. Okay, so we're back in the book. So we've got Lou directing Tony to drive down these dark back roads. And this for me was very Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, the kind of hypnotic, just the light from the cars driving down, the sheer darkness. And it's really hypnotic, but it's also incredibly scary because Tony has no idea where he's going. We don't know where his wife and daughter are. And Lou is saying things like, well, he hasn't killed anyone yet.
Yeah, comforting.
So we do reach the end of the road. It's completely abandoned. Lou basically drops him off and then drives away. And Tony decides that he's going to hide. And then Lou comes back with Ray. And yeah, this is the part where we have, your wife wants to talk to you. Where are you? Tony, come out. And Tony does not. He stays hidden. Which they end up leaving.
Which I would have done too. I'm sorry. If that makes me a coward, I don't care. Like, I am not getting up to go talk to these men.
I mean, it's just not going to end well. Like, everything about this initial stage is none of this ends well. And everybody knows it. And we're all just going along with it, or we're trying to get out of it. So this is what Tony does. Yeah, he has essentially left his wife and daughter, but he's trying to get back to the main road so that he can file a police report. I do kind of appreciate the artifice of this scene. Like, it's dawn and he's in the desert. But if you look in the background, it looks like a hand painting.
Yeah, like a matte painting. Yeah. But I wrote in my notes, I was like, great shot of this. But it looks like almost like it's like from the 50s.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this could be a John Wayne Western. And I kind of like it because it is gently visually reminding us this isn't real. This is the book.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Like that.
Okay, so Tony ends up eventually getting to a police station so he can file a report. He's directed to a local motel because they need to sort things out. Like, we don't know what has happened to Lara.
And Andia.
Andia. So they're like, sit tight. We're going to do a full debrief. We're going to look around. So he ends up taking a bath and we get this match on dissolve between him and Susan, who is now also in the bath. And then he's lying in the bed and then Susan's lying in the bed. And this is when Tony's phone rings. The car has been found, but not the women.
Well,
so
that doesn't bode well.
No, it does not. So enter Detective Bobby Andes, who is played by Michael Shannon with mustache.
He's so good in this movie.
Yeah, he is.
He's a lot of fun. I mean, like, Michael Shannon shows up and he's either going to be a totally weird dude or a villain. It's one of the two.
And this one is a totally weird dude.
And we love him for all of it, though. He's just amazing.
Oh, truly.
Like, he's very charming. In a weird way, he's very charming in this movie.
Well, when you said Coen Brothers, I was like, oh, yeah, of course, with this Bobby Andes character.
Yeah.
So he quizzes Tony, and they're in the car. They're going to retrace Tony's steps so that they can kind of figure out where the wife and daughter might be. And we end up back at this abandoned cattle ranch, and the bodies have been discovered. And it's a pretty, it's a tasteful scene, but the women are nude. Yeah. They're caressing each other on this bright red couch, and it kind of looks like lips, and it kind of looks like Susan's lips.
And because it's the daughter that's facing out, right?
It's her back and butt that's facing out.
Yes, okay. So it's not Isla Fisher's. Yeah.
No.
Got
it. So Susan guests in real life. So we're back in the real world, in the present. And she's so upset that she ends up calling her adult daughter, Samantha, who is played by India Menwez. And Samantha's like, Mom, what the fuck are you doing? It's like 6 a.m. I'm still asleep. Leave me alone.
With a dude.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She's getting fucked.
Well, I think she already got.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
That ship sailed. Yeah.
She got fucked.
There we go. But it's very much like, obviously we're not going to reach out to Hutton because, he's getting fucked. Yeah. And so we needed the reassurance of, dead daughter in the book, need to check on my real life daughter. So let's introduce the third timeline in at this point. So we get our first, I'm going to say, flashback to when Susan and Edward, who now doesn't have a beard, so this is how we can keep them apart visually for a little while at least. So this is Edward. They are meeting on the streets of snowy New York. They're both kind of finishing up like master's, postgraduate degrees. And it's very meet cute. It's very sweet. It's, hey, I always had a crush on you. Let's grab dinner. Let's confess everything about each other. And this is, I don't know. I don't want to say it's exposition or backstory, but it is very telling because we learn a lot about Susan based on the observations that Edward makes and then vice versa. So we learned that Susan has a gay brother who has been disowned and she's not getting along with her mom. She does not want to be like her mom. And of course, this is when Edward says, oh, I like your mom. You know, you have her sad eyes and this does not sit well.
I just love, she's like, that's a really weird fucking thing to say.
She's like, are you thinking about Big Eyes, that Tim Burton movie that I was in?
But it's all very like complimentary, you know, it's deeply romantic. You're like, oh no, not Jake Gyllenhaal and Amy Adams like making doe eyes at each other and hoping to fuck. You know, it's what we all want. I'm
actually glad you pointed out like the snowy streets of New York City because this almost is it shot like a meet cute at a rom-com.
Yeah.
Yes. It's. I mean, this is Tom Ford's fairy tale, right?
Yes.
Where everything starts off and it's so perfect. And things will not stay perfect because this is real life, motherfuckers. Yes. Okay, so end the flashback from the past. We're back now into the book.
Oh, you missed. Well, that is the part. I'm sorry. I wanted to highlight that is the scene in which she says, well, all debutantes are sluts, right? Or whatever the line is. Which I loved. Yes. I lolled very hard at that part. I thought that was great.
Joe, to be clear, Ari grew up in like a debutante city.
I did. And you know what? I would not agree with that, so to speak, but whatever, man. Like, you know, slut positive. I love slut. I love sluts.
I know at least 3 of your friends who were in debutante balls.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But were they all sluts? That's what we
I was probably the biggest slut of them all, but I wasn't a deb though, so
you were the belle of the ball.
I had no excuse.
He calls them debs. He doesn't even call them debutantes. He's familiar.
I was gonna say that's what it is called. That is what they call nomenclature.
Yep.
Okay, so we're back at the book, and this is where Tony learns the sad fates of both his wife and daughter. So we learn that Lara was killed by blunt force and that Andrea was suffocated, but they were both sexually assaulted. Okay, so dead women. I'm now going to introduce a reference. So Victoria Corin Mitchell wrote, I'm so glad to spoil this film for you for The Observer. And this is in the wake of the film receiving 9 BAFTA nominations. Because once again, Tom Ford is British.
Are you sure this isn't Gene Siskel spoiling the plot of Friday the 13th in his review?
It's akin to that. So I'm just going to read you an excerpt of this. This is an opinion piece. So this is very personal. But yeah, here we go. I'm interested to hear your reactions.
Oh, God.
If you're the kind of person who is excited by dead, naked women, then the fear scene will be massively improved by my having told you what's coming. Now you won't have to rewind after the corpse scene to enjoy it properly. We all know how tricky it can be to time a scroll back during effective pornography. Pressing the button can really put you off your stride, can't it? So have this one on me. Enjoy the dread, the sobbing, the terrified and hopeless maternal embrace. Rape is definitely coming. Death is definitely coming. And you'll get to see those corpses with blood smeared carefully on the bums.
I mean,
she's basically saying,
well, she didn't like that.
The reason to like this movie is
so you can jerk off to the violence against women.
Exactly.
Okay, and again, like obviously, totally, like everyone has the right to their own opinion, but it's kind of a thing where it's like, I've seen so much worse than this in movies. Like this is tame by most comparisons for me, and so I also wonder if maybe this person who's writing this piece isn't really into genre films in general.
That's kind of what I got the sense of that just hearing that, because again, I do think that like there's a lot of other actually pretty mainstream films probably that are way depict this way worse, but but even it reminds me a bit of like kind of the people who Because then it's boiling this movie down to that. And I think it's very like the, the reviewers who refer to movies like Texas Chainsaw, even like I know what you did last summer, is like, oh, they're schlocky and full of gore. And I'm like, they're actually not. It's like the suggestions.
I'm even like my comparison I'm going to is like the reactions to Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. I think that's maybe like a good comparison because it's not really a horror movie, but it is kind of reveling in sadism. But again, I'm not getting that in this movie. I don't think this movie revels in sadism.
Well, I brought up the other ones just because people boil down like their perception of something because of the way it made them feel to being like the talking point of the movie. When in reality, if you watch any of those movies, they're not like that. They're not overtly bloody or gory. They're just it's the sense you get from it. So I think this speaks more to like the tone of this being very disturbing, as far as that. But yeah, I mean, again, I everyone is entitled to their own interpretation. I just think it kind of does the movie a disservice to boil it down to just this.
Well, let me offer a little bit of context here. So the reason that I mentioned the BAFTAs is in part, I think, because of the way that the film is presented and the pedigree behind it and the fact that it is in awards contention, right? Like, we're literally recording this on the day that The Substance got nominated for 5 Oscars and everybody's celebrating, but you can also kind of tell there's this underlying tension of, will it actually win anything? Because people don't look at genre fare or exploitation fare or crime fare in quite the same way because we don't see it as prestigious, right?
I will tell you this right now, and I hope to God Demi Moore wins that Oscar, but, and maybe this is me being cynical, I feel like if she wins that Oscar, it's because of her Golden Globe speech. It's not going to be because the Academy is thinking, oh, The Substance is worthy of the Oscars. But either way, I hope she wins one way. I don't care why she wins.
I don't care how she gets there. I hope she
just wins.
But I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that I think like people go into certain kinds of movies expecting to have certain kinds of experiences, and you're like, oh, well, this movie got nominated for a bunch of awards, so how can it be relishing in this sexualized violence and depicting it? And I agree with both of you. I don't think this movie does that, but the way that it gets framed in the conversation, oh, it's made by Tom Ford, he's coming off a single man, all these other things. And I guess I just think it's very unusual that all of a sudden then it becomes tasteless and misogynistic and schlocky and gross. And yeah, as you said, Ari, people are allowed to have their own opinions. But to me, this was very much I went into this expecting a high cultured art film.
Right.
And it is, down in the dirt, showing things. And I don't know. Like, I'm curious that we don't mention that there's a scene where a man literally takes a shit in this movie, because I feel like that also tells you what kind of movie it is. Well, maybe that's a you thing.
I think, because I can also maybe understand complaints where it's like, oh, well, Laura and India are not characters because we barely get to meet them before they get killed. And I could agree with that. But then that's also kind of where I'm like, yeah, but that's Edward's story. Like, that's what we're doing here. But also, I think the way the bodies are shot, it looks like a piece of art, like a tableau almost.
Go back to the opening. There's literally one of the fat women who are positioned almost identically.
The same way.
Exactly. And so maybe that's also a thing where it's like maybe subconsciously because it's shot so
beautifully.
I'm going to say beautifully, but it's a shot of something that is horrific.
Well, I feel like that it's very like Hannibal. I think the show, like, I think it's like there's a lot of really grotesque stuff in that is like that I would kind of just objectively say is gorgeous art, to a degree. It's like, yes, the content. So I think it's kind of like, I think there's a weird, which I don't know where it came from, because I think there have been challenging movies, for years that have been nominated for Oscars even, not even speaking of the BAFTAs, like stuff with like really, thinking like Boys Don't Cry, there's so many that we can talk about in that way, but
Monster,
exactly. And I think that's just an interesting perspective when there's this assumption that an award worthy film has to be like palatable to everyone.
Well, but again, as you said, Ari, earlier, like we're just zeroing in on this one particular thing that really, it is the inciting incident for like Tony's journey, but we're not like sitting with these bodies for a very long time.
It's like not the point of the movie. Yeah, it's like I think that's like why at the end of the day, like the story being about this like relationship that is now filled with regret and it ends and kind of, there's a sense of revenge, throughout, but it's a story about like a relationship gone bad, and it's not necessarily about the exploitation of these women in this, in the book within the movie. So yeah, I just think it cheapens the conversation, and it's like it's a distraction from like a more interesting conversation.
Well, because also it literalizes it, whereas like this entire story is a metaphor for that relationship. So it's like, if you have an artist writing from how he feels, and this is how he feels. Now, granted, I guess you could say, well, why is he taking it out on two women? But it's like it's two women, the death of two women fueling a man's story. Sure, I guess I can maybe kind of see that. I'm not really subscribing to that.
I think there's maybe two other unusual pieces to this. Like, I mean, obviously we're all men, so women are probably responding to it in a different way.
Totally.
And I have seen claims from women over time that says like sometimes it just gets really exhausting to be like, oh, every crime show is about like some girl who gets abducted, raped, and murdered. Yeah. Like that gets real old, real fucking fast. So I totally do get that part. Mm-hmm. The other piece, I guess, that I would say is unique to this film is, you said it offhandedly, Trace, but I'm going to zero in on it. Mm-hmm. You said, well, these girls, like these women are not characters. And I was like, yeah, because this is fiction within the fiction.
It's even more removed.
And that's the thing. It's like we're 2 degrees out of reality here. So it's like we're filtering it through Tom Ford, through Edward, through Tony.
Yeah. So I guess I just found that interesting in a complicated fashion.
Yeah, well, Edward and Susan's reality also is really, I mean, I guess Susan, since we don't see Edward in the present, but it's very heightened as well. It's kind of like it's not relatable to any of us. Like we don't live in those, in those spheres. So
I also love that like we don't have an idea of actually like, is this book good or not? Like we kind of get a feeling of how Susan feels about it. Well, yeah, I think this is a pretty basic story actually, but like, I mean, but it's getting published. So I think by that we're supposed to, but is it a book for the mass market or is it a literary book?
Is Susan buying this on the way through the airport?
Right.
But no, I love that we have no inkling of whether this book is actually good or not, because the story it presents is kind of like, that's this story.
Yeah, like I guess that's the other piece that made this a bit more palatable to me, is that I thought that from all accounts, what we're seeing, at least on screen visually, it makes the book look really schlocky and just kind of thriller, page turnery. So I didn't expect it to be high art or good.
Or maybe it's supposed to be like a Cormac McCarthy type book. I don't know.
It's giving like James Patterson vibes to me.
I could see that. Yeah, no, I could see that. But again, it's like, I think that's like an interesting, dressing to tie up like all of these apparent emotions that have been in him for so long, that this is the story he tells. And it's kind of like, I'm thinking about her earlier in the film talking about, oh, well, maybe you should write about something other than yourself, her critiquing him a bit earlier. So there is kind of, I think, a suggestion that even she at a supportive state, maybe doesn't think he's that great of a writer. Maybe there's not a book in him, and
maybe you need to go back to school, hone your craft a little bit.
Yeah. And so I think that's interesting because we don't really get resolution over that. We don't know if this is meant to be like a slap in the face because it's good, or a slap in the face just because it's kind of like it is what it is, and ultimately like she's just seeing because the takeaway at the end of the day is not, the wife and the, daughter were murdered and it's a vengeance thing. I think it's really just him. It's him kind of bumbling his way through trying to be like the vigilante. And even at the end, he can't even do it right, and so it's really, it's highlighting, I think, like just his feeling of ineptitude as a man. And so again, I will take it that like, even if the book is meant to be bad or schlocky or whatever, like I do think the point still stands that the takeaway is meant to just be like, hey, look what you've done to me. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's jump back to the past, and this is where Susan is meeting with her mother, Anne, who is played by Laura Linney, and we get this statement where I do love this because we read, especially in the styling, that Anne is a bitch right off the top, right? She's high society. She's got certain expectations, and that's why she doesn't want this marriage between Susan and Edward to happen. But then the more she talks, the more I think the reasonable, rational people in the audience. Like, we sit there and we go, shit, she's making some valid points. Like, Susan, this probably isn't what you're looking for. Like, you're entering into the marriage a little naively. And you will turn against this man because this is the romantic phase. And then shit's going to get real and it's going to get tough and you're going to want to walk away.
I do love she keeps fighting Susan too. She's a different kind of strength. And what kind of strength is that?
It's so funny because like this whole conversation in any type of movie, it really does like again, I went to school initially to work in music. And so like the things that I heard about my decision to do that, which ultimately I didn't, I don't work in that, field, and I still have like, an interest in it and all that, but it's not what I do.
He says talking to two podcasters about movies.
but like I said, I think that like it's one of those things that it always strikes a nerve when I hear that because it's a very real thing that like a parent would say as much as it's like really kind of like
it sucks.
It's out of pocket and not miss the mark. And again, I'm not someone who would ever like listen to that shit. I'd be like, whatever. I'd rather take a risk and like do something fun or do something that feels right, than kind of take the safe route and just like money. Like, so there's a part of this conversation that did remind me of just kind of growing up and being like, well, but what about money? How are you going to make money?
Yeah.
And it's like,
how are you going to live?
This is what a lot of, especially I would say that generation in the context of like being a Texas family and all, that is the concern.
Mentality. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's real.
So it's very real, despite like, Laura Linney playing up the Texan-ness of it all.
I mean, truthfully, it's a little bit of a caricature, but I kind of don't care.
Oh, like I was saying, she's like literally coming off of some like wacky stage play.
I mean, the Aquanet is real in that hairstyle.
Oh gosh, yeah. Thank God she wore Aquanet. Carol Brady.
Yes, I
know. Okay, so back in the present, Susan does send an email to Edward asking if they can meet because she really loves the book. So I guess we are meant to believe that this is an improvement in his writing because she doesn't have the same kind of critiques. Or we could say she's missing him. And so she's like, this is an opportunity, an olive branch to get in the room with him again.
I think there's also a third option, which is just like, because I think she says this is unlike anything he's ever written because of how dark it is. And so I think even that alone is the reason why she would want to talk to him about it.
Okay.
Well, also because she refers to like being referred to by him as a nocturnal animal. Like, right? So I think in that sense, it's kind of like him almost showing her like, look, there was a grit to me. Look, there was this part of me that is dark, that is able to kind of match you to a degree. So even then it's like, it's almost like a flex of sorts and almost like it more intriguing to her almost to want to reconnect with him now that she's read this. And I think it's interesting because you could take it as like, oh, maybe now he's more attractive to her because he's a bad boy. Dark and troubled and mad. Yeah. Which is like, I think that makes, kind of what happens for the rest of the film really interesting to interpret.
I mean, geez, I do walk away from this movie thinking, Susan, you're a fucking mess. Go to therapy and work on yourself. Like, you're surrounding yourself with bad men in multiple timelines.
And that's the funny thing. I'm like, you're a rich woman in LA. Like, go to a shrink. Like, come on.
Really? A psychopharmacotherapist.
I would say that Susan is probably like, she's probably popping pills. She's probably one of those who's like, I don't know, it's fine. Just give me my like Valium.
Which actually interesting that we never see something like that happen.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too on the nose.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we don't get like quite that stereotype of that type.
It would be so stereotypical.
Yeah.
Okay. So back into the book. We have Bobby sending a picture of a suspect to a now beardless Tony. So the timelines are beginning to blur a little bit. And Tony, like, basically doesn't even look at the picture. He covers the face because he can't really bear to do it. And he says he doesn't recognize this person. But then in the night, he ends up having a nightmare of the assault. So this is the closest we come to seeing the actual sexual assault, but it's very much a nightmare sequence. We're not really seeing much. Mm-hmm. And then there's another match on action of Tony and Susan as we hear Edward's voiceover about writing, which is like the reason he writes is to make things last forever. Mm-hmm. So, still in the book, we have passed 1 year since the murders, and this is when Bobby calls Tony in. So, he wants him to look at men in a lineup because they think that they may have found someone. And we immediately see, and so does Tony, that it is Lou, and he is ready to testify. He's like, yep, let's put this motherfucker behind bars, and now all we need to do is get Ray. Okay, so back in the present, we have Susan discussing Edward with her assistant, and this is Alex, played by Zawe Ashton. And it's very clear that Susan doesn't typically have a relationship like this with Alex, because Alex is like, wait, you were married before?
Yeah.
I've never heard about this. And then we have Susan sort of like walking around the art gallery. We do see her pausing in front. The movie is not always subtle, so she does pause in front of a painting she feels she has never seen before that just says revenge.
Revenge. She's like, who put this here? It's like, didn't and then they said she bought it like 8 years ago or something.
Yeah. Like, oh, I'm only now starting to see it because I'm literally connecting the dots to my past via this book that my ex sent me.
Right.
That he dedicated to me.
Yeah. So this is where we get a nice jump scare on the baby monitor of Jenna Malone's character, who
God.
I have to say, this character, we never say her name, but she is credited as Sage Ross.
Okay.
That sounds about right.
What the fuck?
This is such an anomaly of a scene in this movie. Like, I don't know why this is here, but I kind of love it. And
I love it. I love that. It scared the shit out of me. I forgot that was happening.
So here's the thing. The reason that I said this reminds me of Mulholland Drive in part is because of some of the driving sequences, the kind of doppelganger-ness, but also this is the Bonnie Abrams, like, unhoused person behind the diner sequence for this movie.
But because I love when we have a jump scare in a non-horror movie, because you truly do not see it coming.
Do not expect it.
It's like, and again, like I appreciate the, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, even like Inland Empire, that era of David Lynch, and also it's just like my favorite era of his. But yeah, no, I just always love those little touches of something that is just overtly like horror, and it's just there and it happens, and there's not even always an explanation for it. It just, and actually with David Lynch, there's never an explanation for it really, but like even like, like the man without the eyebrows and Lost Highway who's calling from the house, it's those really creepy fucking moments. And this is like, I just really appreciated this because I really didn't remember it. It scared the shit out of me.
But then it's punctuated by a comedic beat because she's like, oh, I thought I saw someone. And Jenna Malone's like, well, you did see someone. Yeah. It's my baby.
The baby.
Asleep in a crib.
Jenna Malone.
We should note that Jenna Malone is dressed like the
Cruella.
most, like... Cruella, but yeah, I mean, Ari, you said earlier, Velvet Buzzsaw. Like, all of these people are such caricatures of LA art scene / snob, so it's delicious.
We're also, because we're making a lot of commentary here because, Amy Adams breaks the phone and she's like, oh, it's okay, the new one comes out next week anyway. And then we move into this, like, conference room with all these people, and then we get another, it's a cameo for me and probably all of us, but not people
You mean Samantha Van Helsing, played by Kristen Bauer Van Straten?
Oh, yeah.
Pam from True Blood.
Pam, and like her whole shtick is like, I guess she just had some work done that's very obvious.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just that whole scene is so weird and out of pocket and like why?
What is this
I love
doing
it.
in here?
Yeah, like it really tonally doesn't mesh with the rest of the film, but like it still works.
But then it
for
does, because like
Yeah.
think about like the opening. Like think about there's these random little, so it is very much that kind of movie. And the more I think about that and we talk about it, the more I do like kind of appreciate that Lynchian comparison, just in the sense of like the movie does things at times and you're just like, to what end, for what reason, and there really isn't one beyond like the aesthetic of it or the vibe of it,
Well, I think in these scenes, it's the reinforcement that this is purportedly what Susan's real life is. And it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
It's baby monitor jump scares and plastic surgery and like shit that just doesn't matter. We need to get back to the book because we need to self-actualize.
Yeah. No, that's good.
I like that. Okay. Yeah. I like that.
So back she does. We're in the dark, empty house. She is drinking. She is reading. So we're in the book. We've got Tony hanging out with a now coughing Bobby. We will discover that he has lung cancer. He is about to be forced into early retirement. But we've tracked down Ray. So, gentlemen, take off your pants because we're taking a shit.
Like, again, the fact that we see that shit and we don't get any kind of nudity from Johnson in this film is just like a crime.
It's wild.
Yeah. Also, Ari, did you catch this? His dropped rape charge was from Lubbock, Texas.
Oh, was it? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't. Wow, that sounds about right.
Do you have outdoor porta potties like this, or?
I don't know that he was. Yeah, I don't know that area. If that's where he was.
That's Ari doing his Mariah Carey. I don't know.
I don't know her. I don't know her. No, I don't think at that point that he was living in Lubbock, Texas.
No,
he was out in the boon somewhere, because they said that didn't he like rig up like his special plumbing plus electricity, and so he could talk on the phone while taking a shit or something. I don't know.
Which I'm just like, I don't want to be shitting on my front porch, yo. I don't care about people seeing me or not. I just don't want to be shitting on my front porch.
Yeah, no thanks.
It's a rocky entrance. Like, this is where people will hypothetically come up to greet you.
Well,
you just got a toilet there.
Who's coming up to greet Ray except for Lou and Turk?
I mean, he's very clearly not on the lam, but he is laying low, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this does make sense. We end up handcuffing him, taking him for a ride so that we can ask him questions. This is all very illegal, but it's okay because Ray sucks. So we go to the trailer, and this is where Tony screams at him a little bit. We hit Ray because this is the start of Tony getting a backbone, manning up. Like, this is really... take out your revenge on this man who killed your wife and daughter, and so on. And this is where he then demands answers. And we are cutting between this, so the book, and the past, as we see Susan giving Edward this negative feedback on his manuscript. And she's encouraging him, I just don't think it's really working. Like, I got bored, and I don't think that's a good sign. To which the writer in me croaked a little bit, because that's pretty much the worst thing you could say to someone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the thing, like, in her mind, she's just being... Well, actually, question. Do you think she's being intentionally cruel here, or do you think in her mind she's just being honest?
I think at this point she's intentionally trying to push him the way of going back to a more, quote-unquote, like, stable, safe career.
Yeah. That's interesting, Ari. Before you said that, I was going to say, no, I think she's just trying to be helpful.
That's what I was going to say, too.
But there is a bit of a bite to it, right? Like, we don't hear her say anything nice about this. And for all we know, this is the 60th draft that she's had to read. But in the world of the film that we are seeing, we're only seeing it the one time, and it just kind of looks like she's being a little bit unnecessarily cruel.
Because she finishes this with, like, you're just going to work in a bookstore and write a novel? That's what you want to do with your life? And that...
The great American novel.
Yeah. Exactly.
So we stay in the past for a little bit. We get this brief silent meet cute. Now only it's with Hutton. So she is in class. She drops her pen. He hands it over to her. This is all we need to see. He's clearly going from friend zone to fuck zone. So he's there for her during the dissolution of her marriage. And of course, we will see him pick her up at the abortion clinic later on.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay, in the book, Tony learns that Ray has been released because, unfortunately, due to Bobby's early retirement, they're exploring whether or not he did all of his investigating and all of his, evidence collection correctly. So basically, shit is starting to fall apart, and if we want to get Ray, it's got to be vigilante justice time. So, in the past, we have very little of present-day Susan. She ends up telling Edward that she is very unhappy, and this is a nice mirroring of their New York meet-cute, where it was snowy and romantic, and this is on the street. It's not sexy. It's not romantic. She's just saying, oh, I'm actually deeply unhappy, and I don't want to do this, and she just walks away. This is the lower part of the film. Things are falling apart.
Yeah.
Nobody's happy.
No. I mean, it really just gets down and down and down from here, but...
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we talk about the scene where Tony finally mans up? So we get Ray. We also get Lou, and we take them back to this trailer, and we're holding them at gunpoint. But I mean, is this Bobby's attempt to say, Tony, you have to do this? Because he hands him the gun because he's coughing, because he's dying. But it also kind of feels like, no, man, this is your show. If you're going to do it, you got to do it.
Yeah, I kind of got that. He didn't say it in as many words, but that's the implication I got.
Yeah, same. Like, I kind of like him supporting him through this process, and this is kind of him saying, all right, like, I did my job, here it is.
It felt less hostile than in the beginning scene when they meet, when he's like, you didn't go out when they said your wife wants to talk to you. Like, that felt pointed.
Mm-hmm.
This at least feels more almost like mentor-y.
Yeah, we're going to get through this together. This is the only way you're ever actually going to see him pay for this, because clearly the criminal justice system is going to fail you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So, well, Bobby is hacking up a lung. We do try to make a break for it. Ray gets away. Lou does not. We shoot him in the back, and then Bobby finishes him off with a headshot. It's very like gangland execution style. Yeah. This is where we jump back to the past, and we've got the abortion clinic scene. I don't think I was meant to chuckle, but I like that they're in the car in the aftermath. So it's Susan and Hutton, and she says, I just feel so bad. Like, I don't like the way that we're talking about abortion as though it was already a child and she took something away from Edward. I was like, ew, no, to this language.
What I do think is interesting, though, is what she says exactly is, I just don't think I'm ever going to be able to look at Edward again after what I did to his child. Not our child, his child.
Yeah, because clearly the relationship was not in a good state, but it does seem like she was already planning her exit when we discover, oh, fuck, I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
But, and we don't really get that in this movie, but don't, because again, like, these are scenes of remorse. Like, she made the decision, I get it. She made a bad decision, but we see the remorse here. Don't you ever feel like it's Hutton kind of like directing her into these things? I guess that takes some of the responsibility off of Susan, which is not what we're supposed to do.
I don't know that we have enough information to say that he guided her towards the abortion, but he was clearly, like, I read this as him, as I said, moving from friend zone to fuck zone, where he's going to be there, he's going to be the shoulder to cry on, and then we know that they get married. Mm-hmm. So it's clearly him working the angle to get in here. But the reason I said I chuckled and it was probably inappropriate is because she says, well, he can, like, Edward can never find out.
Oh,
and then Edward is
and then he's
standing in front of the car
in the rain.
Which again,
Looney Tunes.
Well, what I think is interesting though is, like, I don't know that we get confirmation that he ever does, quote unquote, find out that she had an abortion. Like, maybe finds out that she has been kind of, going around with Hutton. But so I actually do appreciate that ambiguity around it, because we don't know.
Because I think there is a version of Nocturnal Animals, his book, where it's just Laura. Like, there is no daughter. Laura gets killed, but he included a child in the story for a reason. And it could be that he knows, or it could be you had that child with that man that you cheated on me with.
Right. Yeah, because the daughter, so Tony's daughter in the book, is approximately the same age as hers in real life. So
exactly.
I like that. You could read that either way.
Mm-hmm. Well, although I guess if they're parked outside, is it an abortion clinic or is it a hospital,
Well, I don't know. I don't know at that point that they're still just there.
Oh, I thought they were in the parking lot. Like, I thought she walked out in the rain into the car because he was picking her up, and then. But I guess
that's also what I thought. But then it's like, why is Edward just there? Maybe he's tailing them. We don't know. Like, the movie is not telling us any of this information. It's all speculation. Yeah. Anyway, this will be the last that we see of Edward in this film. So from now on, we will only see Tony. Yeah. No more flashbacks. Mm-hmm. So presumably this was the death of the marriage.
Well, the death knell.
Well, yeah, sorry. That was gauche. Okay, so we go back to the book, and Tony is yelling that he's glad that Lou is dead, but then he has this big emotional breakdown where he realizes that he wishes that he could have stopped it, and it being the death of his wife and daughter. So we basically go from this to Tony tracking Ray down in another kind of derelict your balls kind of location. We've got Tony with the gun. We've got Ray with a fireplace poker of some kind.
Yeah.
And it's a standoff. Everybody gets some blows in, but Tony ends up winning.
But again, it's like bumbling. It's like it's not even direct. I think like it's because he gets hit pretty hard too, and then he passes out. And...
I didn't get this, but he's meant to be blinded when he gets hit with the fire poker.
I got it at the end, but not immediately.
The way
took
he
me
was
quite
feeling
a while.
around, I kind of assumed that at least like he's partially blinded because it looks like it hit him in the eye.
Oh, yeah, because I guess Michael Shannon's out of this movie too, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Presumably after he shot Lou,
He just
that
left.
was the end of it.
Well, because they talk about like, he's like, are you going to get in trouble for this? And he's kind of like, I don't give a shit. I'm about to die.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit unceremonious. Like the movie really does just kind of cast people aside unless they're Susan, but also maybe telling.
Yeah.
So when Tony does wake up from getting hit in the face, he discovers that he has managed to successfully kill Ray. So Ray is done. He did try to bait him and say, well, you're never going to shoot me. Like, essentially the same kind of argument we had. And this case, Tony does manage to.
It doesn't feel satisfying though, does it? I think because Ray is so cocky to the very, very end, it doesn't feel satisfying. Like this guy needed to get tortured.
Well, also because like he doesn't even like get to watch him die or like have this because he gets knocked out immediately after he shoots him, and then he wakes up and then Ray's dead already.
But I think that's the point. Like,
I think so too.
And we're really coming to the end of the movie. Like this movie almost doesn't have a proper climax or what we would consider a proper climax. And I think it's very purposeful because I don't think any of this violence, like, again, we're talking about fictional violence within the book that Edward has written, but I don't think it's actually meant to be satisfying because it doesn't prove anything. Like, he's still a pathetic man.
Exactly. And like even just then, like he's like crawling, he's like really dragging himself out of that shack. He falls down, and then
does he accidentally shoot himself, or is this a suicide?
I am like on the fence about that because even yesterday I was thinking like I could see it being an accident and that being kind of the punctuation of a joke to this whole what this character of himself, but. Yeah,
on the gun.
I don't know. I mean, I think either way, it's like.
But I think that's where the blinding factor comes into it because he can't see, so he bumbles. But like, it's also because he can't see anything. But I could also read this as a suicide of sorts.
I did read it a bit more as a suicide, and I mean, we're not advocating for this at all. But I think in the world of this film, in Tony's arc, he has now accomplished what he has set out to do. He has nothing else, quote unquote, to live for.
Yeah.
And so he shoots himself. But I did want to know, he shoots himself in the abdomen, which is exactly where Susan's pregnancy would have been. Yeah. Because remember, they are mirrors of one another.
I did not put that together, actually. But that would then imply that would then seemingly answer our question that he did know she got an abortion, if we read it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we do get to hear his heartbeat slowly stopping as once again we are seeing present day Susan sitting in the bath, and the diegetic sound from the world of the book also seems to be carrying over into her real world. And this is where she gets the email from Edward, and he says,
let me know when and where.
So, last couple of scenes, we've got Susan checking herself out in the mirror as she gets dressed. She's wearing this absolutely boobalicious, gorgeous green. Man. It looks kind of velvety, very busty dress.
She took this dress from the set of Leap Year. She kept this dress and just used it.
A deep cut from Trace.
I worked at Blockbuster when this movie hit DVD, and I'm telling you, we had a green wall for months. I was so annoyed by it. Was anyway.
It's because nobody rented that movie. It was always green.
Yes, but I will say though, like, green, especially this shade of green, dresses on redheaded women are so stunning.
Oh, it's very much, what was her name from Lost, and she was in Once Upon a Time?
Emily DeRay.
No. It's the woman who plays
the Bellin.
She plays the Wicked Witch of the West. She played Charlotte in like season 4 of Lost. She was one of the with
Rebecca something, but she's gorgeous.
Yeah,
I feel like they always had her in green.
But she plays the Wicked Witch of the West in Once Upon a Time.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No, but you're absolutely right. Like green on redheads, it's a perfect combination. It often matches their skin tone and all these other things. But I mean, I think it was at this point where I thought, man, Amy Adams just so fucking gorgeous in this entire movie. Like she kind of looks like a work of art, and she's often so stationary that she could just be her own, art installation in this empty house for an audience of just us. But it dawned on me in this scene, I don't think I've ever seen a movie with so many fucking redheads. Like, it's Tom Ford representing redheads for the masses.
There you go.
So.
Love it.
Okay, so we do. Interesting that we talked about the substance earlier because I could only think about that when she wipes off the red lipstick.
Yeah.
But as you said, Ari, it's because she's trying to get back to that girl she was 19 years ago. So fixes the hair, gives herself the softer look. She's not as quote unquote severe. And then we head to the restaurant and we wait.
And we wait.
And we drink and we wait and we drink and we wait. And I mean, it's clear to us as soon as she gets there. I'm just like, well, girl, he's not coming.
And as soon as the time lapse happens, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. We see, because I think that's the thing. You know, I said at the top of the episode, like the whole movie doesn't fully come together for me until the ending, because it's also like, yes, you know, he's getting revenge, but this final piece that he does by not showing up to this dinner is just. I mean, I'm just
twist of the knife.
Did he have a binder? Like, did he have a binder of his plan for revenge?
How many steps? Send her piece of art that says revenge. Wait 8 years.
There's a long con.
Invite her. I was actually going to say that at the beginning, and you just reminded me, but I was like, this movie is like the longest revenge con like ever. And it's just like punctuated by this very, you know, like a very quiet moment, which I remember the first time I saw this, and like Trey said earlier, the ending scene where she's waiting and waiting, and like I just felt myself like being actually kind of excited, like, oh, they're gonna, like, I wonder what this is gonna be, like some crazy tense scene. It's gonna be, you know, they're finally face to face, and then like just I didn't even ever think about the possibility that he would never show up, and it was like, wow, that is like totally poignant and appropriate, and just like the close up on her eyes.
Well, she starts. They're tearing up a little bit too. Yeah. I think the other thing is too. Like the first time I saw this, I didn't realize that we were about to end the movie, and so when it cuts to black, I was kind of like, oh,
yeah, oh yeah,
you got me.
Do y'all want to hear how the book ends? The real book, the book this is based on.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
You mean Tony and Susan?
Tony and Susan, yes. Okay, so Tony and Susan end. So basically, Susan enjoys Edward's novel and finds herself sympathizing with Tony. She decides to invite Edward over for dinner the night he is in town. Again, remember, she's a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids in this book. To discuss his work. Edward never calls, despite the fact that Susan leaves several messages at his hotel. The following day, having discovered he has checked out, she writes a thoughtful piece of criticism for him and then throws it away, sending him a brief note instead telling him she will give him her thoughts if he would like them. The end.
Oh,
I know. I like the movie ending better.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
It's more of a gut punch, right?
Yeah.
Like that one feels like maybe there hasn't been a lesson learned. Like the fact that she even writes out a criticism.
Yeah.
It feels unfinished, actually. Like that, there's nothing about that feels final. But I guess because I haven't read it, you know, I don't really know.
Well, and I will say, Tom Ford does speak very highly of the book. I mean, obviously he adapted it, but he loves the book, and it wasn't like he adapted it because he wanted to change it. He just adapted it for his own thing.
Right. Okay, so I do want to have a conversation about this end, because it sounds like both of you are quite high on it. But as I mentioned, I did see a number of reviews that said it doesn't really have a proper climax. It just kind of putters out. And I don't know what the message is, or like what is the takeaway from this. And I thought that was a bit curious, because I think for some people, the sheen, the polish of the film makes it kind of antiseptic. And when it ends this way, without that kind of quote unquote satisfying catharsis of getting to see them meet and maybe yell at each other or make up or something, I think people feel like, okay, so what? Like, what is the message about revenge here? Is it just that he's petty and she's a bitch? So I guess I thought it was interesting that some people really walked away from this feeling like it was a hollow film and it didn't have anything to say.
So, I will tell y'all Tom Ford's is a theme for the movie, but I'll wait until we have this discussion. But yeah, for me, I guess on the surface level, yeah, this to me is like, I love that this is a revenge tale where we actually never get to meet the person getting the revenge, like in the present day timeline. So I just thought this was a really nifty little revenge story. I didn't think it was hollow at all. I think it was a different way of telling this kind of story.
Yeah, I actually feel very similarly. I think, again, like, I love a simple story told in a creative, way that has layers, or that, like, looks at different ways of, like, I don't know, manipulating the media or whatever, like, the medium. And so I think, I don't know, I really just, I love a revenge story. I love a story about a relationship that fell apart. I love kind of the bittersweet, the pangs of, like, ooh, that hurts a bit. And I like it because I remember thinking, like, oh, I feel bad for her. And then it's like, ooh, but I have, like, I can think of at least one or two people at the time that I wish I could do something like that too.
Okay.
So it was very cathartic in a way, but also, like,
Right.
again, I think there's a dialectic there. It's, like, complicated of, like, ooh, that feels really good. And it also feels really bad because, like, you are able to see kind of her arc, even just, like, as she's reading the story, even just watching her read it, that, like,
Right.
you can understand, like, that things are becoming clearer to her and that maybe she's rethinking things a bit more. And so I think, like, it's like the hope of forgiveness, and then it's snatched away. And
Right.
that, to me, just, it worked. And I don't know, like, I think it's an interesting critique when it's like, oh, I don't understand what it's trying to say. It's like, well, it just told you a whole fucking story about two people. Like, it doesn't have to say anything about the state of the world.
I think the hollowness, though, might come from the fact that this film, at least in the real world, not the Nocturnal Animals book world, like, it does feel detached emotionally.
Right.
But that's why I like it,
Yeah.
because I think, like, we are getting all of the emotional context is through the story, which is also, like, a warped filter. It's like a story within a film that's told from the perspective of this guy who we don't ever even see. We only know him through flashbacks. And so it's like, I don't know. I just think that's a really, really cool way to kind of, like, reveal someone's emotional journey and kind of provide background context. Like, I didn't ever feel like, even the moments that were, arguably a little more expository, I really like them. Like, I love the meet cute part. I love the scene in the car with her and Armie Hammer, so just this, I guess that argument is one that is frustrating to me to hear, when people are like, well, what is it trying to say? And I'm like, it's just a revenge story. I don't know that it has to say much more. It's probably more like, I appreciate the form, the way that it told the story, because it kind of flips it around a little bit and does it in a way that's different than maybe what we're used to.
I wonder if that's part of the BAFTA argument, right? Like, this isn't a schlocky genre film. It doesn't get away with not having something important to say. Like, this is in awards contention. It's made by this celebrated, visualist with A-list actors. It has to mean something more. And the reality is like, well, A, it kind of does, even if you don't get it or like it. But also B, no, not always. Like, sometimes art is just art.
Yeah.
And sometimes art is incredibly political. Like, I don't know. That's kind of why let me frame this. So my initial watch of this back at TIFF when it first came out was, I felt like it was uneven because I was a little bit more attracted to the genre elements. I liked Amy Adams, but I felt like her parts were really cold and stiff, and I didn't really connect with the character. And I thought, this is kind of two films in one, and they didn't really gel for me. Like, I understood that she was emotionally affected by the book, and I got to the revenge at the end of it, and I thought that was mean and fun in a way, like the way it was executed. But I felt like we spent so much time within the world of the book, and none of it ultimately mattered. So that was my initial watch. I was like, yeah, it's fine, it's pretty, but it didn't really work for me. And then after things like this conversation, I realized, do we need to maybe spend as much time within the book with Tony? Maybe not, but it does actually line up or sync up more than I realized. But it was only because we just had this
2-hour conversation about it.
Exactly. Like, to me, that's the power of the medium, but also the reason why you need to get together with friends and have the fucking conversation, especially if you're like, oh, it didn't really work for me. Okay, tell me why.
I would always want to do that. I think with people that I know, I don't want to invite that, from strangers or whatever, because that's exhausting, and I'm not going to do that all day long on the internet. But I do think that, like, whenever I go see a film like this, and other people have mixed views. Like, I like us talking about it. And I do think, like, it's happened at times for me whenever, like, I had a different interpretation of a film or got a different perspective after having a nice conversation afterwards. And, you know, this kind of goes back to, you know, the commentary of the one reviewer who wrote the editorial about the violence against women. Right. And even just the discussion we had about the opening of the film. I think if we are constantly picking, you know, kind of cherry picking these little fragments of a whole piece of art and deciding to make a sweeping judgment about the film as a whole because of that, then we're limiting the conversation. And so I think if nothing else, if you are someone who finds yourself like, oh, I just can't get over this one part of it and I just hated that, like, I like to invite people to, like, I don't know, try to challenge that a little bit. Like, let's talk a little bit more about the other stuff, like the whole of it all, because again, I think you're less likely to react in this really polarized way if you are able to kind of get more perspective and just hear other views. So
I think that's something I always struggle with when why maybe I'm a little bit combative when someone is like, oh my God, this movie is one of the worst things I've ever seen, or it's so terrible, I hated it. Like I hate very few movies. And I couldn't even name one off the top of my head of a movie that I absolutely hate that has no redeeming values whatsoever. And I always...
Yeah, like there's always something positive or something interesting, or you're like, oh, this didn't work for me, but then you hear it did for other people. Yeah. And that's fascinating.
Yes. But I do find that, and especially in these times, we tend to get in like these sanctimonious moral soapboxes when we're talking about why we don't like a film. And I feel like when people are that passionate about it, it's usually when it's about some political messaging or something like that in the film. And I understand that, but I'm also just like, but maybe there's more layers to it than just the surface. Like, this movie is not just about violence against women and seeing naked nude corpses, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that is kind of the lack of that nuance that has unfortunately plagued a lot of the conversations in modern times, especially online, you know, where we have limited, you know, words that we can share to other people and we have to go for the soundbite or whatever. I think, you know, I just personally have no interest in that. And so whenever I hear or come across articles where things are boiled down in this very like absolutist way, like, I'm just like, I'm sorry, maybe watch more movies, because there are genuinely like films out there that are like grossly, you know, offensive, dangerous, that maybe deserve a little bit more of that. And even then I would probably, you know, want to try to find something in it that's, you know, I don't know. I think it's the curiosity to find more beyond like maybe like your first surface level take that I really appreciate.
Maybe that's why I get really defensive about it too, because I always feel like the implication in some things like that are like, if you like this, then you must.
Oh yeah.
And I guess maybe that's not always the implication, but I feel like generally more often than not that is the implication.
Well, it's like, you like this. It's number one. It's like, well, you like it, so you are sanctioning it.
Yeah.
Or how could you like it if it does X? You know, like, what does that say about you as a person? And those are just not interesting conversations, because like the moralizing of art in this way every time, it's just like, it leaves so little room for nuance and for like the both and of it all.
And I feel like that all of us being big horror fans who work in the horror industry, we are very familiar with these kind of interactions, which I think is why I get really upset. And maybe I'm going off too much of a tangent here, so I'll end it with this.
Same also.
but no, I'll just say, but I think I'm always surprised when it's horror fans that are getting into this kind of mindset of like moralizing like the quality of a film. And I'm always like, but like, horror, man, like, come on.
Pretty ironic considering the history of the genre. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say maybe to close it out, if you find yourself, folks, in a position where you're just like, this didn't work for me, or I really hated that one component or something, do try to seek out, like, as Ari said, do it in a safe way. Like, don't engage people, but maybe like, honestly, that's why critics do exist, is because you can go out and you can read other people's takes. And I have found so often that even reading people whose opinions I don't agree with, it helps me to reshape my argument or help me to organize my thoughts into a more succinct way, because I'm like, oh, I don't agree with that. What do I agree with? Or why do I feel differently? And so on.
Exactly. Now, final thing before we close out. Tom Ford.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so what does Tom Ford say?
Tom Ford says, the central theme of Nocturnal Animals is don't throw people away in your life. When you find people you love, hang on to them.
Okay. That's maybe a little too simple for the movie that he's made for that.
Maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe he's boiling it down to something very simpler, what he was feeling when he was making it. That wasn't my takeaway from it, but
no.
But yeah, sure.
No, I mean, I actually like, I view it as kind of like the, I'm thinking of the argument around Susan's mom, trying to justify why she shouldn't be with Tony.
Right.
And, sorry, Edward. And that is, that plays into, I think, what he's trying to say. And I think it's really like, yeah, like there's a superficiality here. And it's kind of like if you have a choice between what, the trappings of something that looks beautiful and perfect and, oh gosh, the grass is always greener. And then you have someone that's comfortable or something that, you have something that's a little bit more grounded. That's going to maybe be more attractive and then maybe question, like, is that sustainable though? Like, is that something that I want to base my future on, this kind of like idea of having money and being this certain public figure? Or is it more, I mean, again, that just comes down to kind of like, how do you want to say you lived your life? Did you live it with people you loved, caring, spending time with them, making memories, or did you care only about the superficiality of things? And so, I could see that being, there's definitely more to say about that, but I could see that being like a very valid, kind of like takeaway from this story and why that would be motivating to him, in that way.
Yeah.
Well, okay. That is Nocturnal Animals.
There we go.
I think we've said enough, but does anyone have anything final to say on the film before I close this out?
I will say that I love this film, and I keep saying I'm going to pick something fun the next time, and I promise I will try.
Here's the thing, though. Every time you come on, we have these fantastic conversations. So part of me is like, yeah, if you can pick one where we get to have the same level, like the same caliber of conversation, absolutely. But also, I don't want you to apologize for liking weird, challenging, dark films, Ari, because like, think of the richness we get out of them.
Well, I also think too, because both of y'all are way more eloquent than I am when it comes to parsing through controversial material, and so it's always helpful for me when Ari comes in with a controversial film, and it's like, oh, good, like y'all can help communicate some of the things that I'm thinking without me having to like figure it out.
Right.
Okay, everyone. Well, before we announce what we're covering next week, Ari, let everyone know where can they find you on social media, because we might have changed since last time. I don't know.
A lot has changed on social media in general since last time,
boy.
I'd imagine. But no, generally speaking, you can find me at the Ari Drew and all of the normal places. I'm probably most active on Blue Sky. And a little bit on Instagram, but if not through socials, which again, I am kind of admittedly pulling away a bit from that. I still am active on Bloody Disgusting every month with my column Found Frights. So at this point, I've had a couple of pieces out and have many more coming. So I hope that those of you who love found footage like I do and maybe want to discover some new films in the subgenre will check it out.
There we go.
All right. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Blue Sky and Instagram at HorrorQueers, or shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. If you want to chat with other listeners, join our Facebook Horror Queers group. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you want more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you will get 363 hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on Hannibal Season 2, Episodes 1 and 2, Companion, Heart Eyes, The Monkey, and a brand new audio commentary on Pitch Black for its 25th anniversary.
All right.
Yeah, but Joe, what are we talking about next week?
All right, so we're not doing a ton of like theme episodes, but it is Valentine's Day coming up, so we thought we would do a deeply romantic film trace. Oh. No, I'm just fucking kidding. We're going to talk about a girl with a vagina dentata, so we're going to talk about teeth.
Content warning for sexual assault, everyone, but it's also a horror comedy, so I think...
And like a good for her kind of movie, so...
Yes. Needless to say, Joe and I do like this movie, but please tune in next week to hear our full thoughts on it. But until next week, we can cross out Nocturnal Animals.
Indeed, and cross out horror queers.